Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Deku Became Captain Japan, Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Sorry kid, it ain't gonna happen. All it took to ruin the boy's dreams was that one sentence. Aspirations to be a hero who, in spite of all the odds, saved lives and defended the defenseless. All Might is the same type of hero who always appeared smiling. Even as a young boy, he vividly remembered that his dreams were as dispersed as the stars in the night sky above him before he saw the symbol of peace and justice arrive on the scene. It wasn't until he saw the tall hero, his smile, and how easily he saved people that the boy's dream became clear and he saw himself as that kind of hero. The boy's only real worry was how long he would have to wait before he could begin on the path to realizing his dream in a world where almost everyone born was guaranteed to possess some sort of superpower or meta ability. Izuku Midoriya, a young boy whose father could breathe fire and whose mother was capable of using telekinesis, thought he would either inherit one or receive a combination of the two. On the day his mother took him to the doctor for a quirk evaluation and a health checkup, that was all he could think about. The doctor then informed him that a single conclusion was drawn from all of the test results. Izuku Midoriya proved to be the exception to the rule that people are born without quirks, even though their parents were third-generation quirk users. Even the boy was aware that even if one parent had just one quirk, the likelihood of a child being born without any quirks was low, and it was nearly impossible for two quirk parents to have a child without any quirks. Nevertheless, the doctor informed him that he was the exception in some way. Izuku's entire world just fell apart when he heard that sentence. He knew his mother and the doctor were still conversing. However, he did not hear a single sentence or word suggesting that the child might have a quirk from birth. The information he was given was too much for his mind to process. So much so that it wasn't until his mother gave him permission to use the computer that he realized they had arrived home. When Izuku entered the commands to play the video, which he had undoubtedly seen over 100,000 times, it was almost unconsciously done. In his debut video, All Might uttered a line that became synonymous with his title as the symbol of justice and peace. "Fear not, citizens, for hope has arrived, because I am here." Izuku watched it a few more times, but after a while his mind began to return to reality. So much so that he realized his mother had been watching him from the door. For some reason, he couldn't resist asking his mother a question that he would later regret ever asking. Izuku turned to his mother and wept uncontrollably. "Look at that, Mom. No matter how bad things get, there's always a smile on his face. Even when things seem impossible, he never gives up." His eyes met his mother's. "Do you think I can be a hero too?" Izuku's mother couldn't stand to be asked that one question. The only thing she thought she could do for her son was to do it. She approached him, hugged him, and even started crying. "I'm sorry, Izuku. I wish things were different." It was all she could do for her son, as a loving mother would say. However, for Izuku, it was the last nail that would put his dream to rest. Despite everything, Izuku had hoped that his mother still believed in his dream and that there might be a chance, however remote, that he could still be a hero. However, to Izuku, his mother's words, which were intended to be consoling, were equivalent to sprinkling salt on an open wound. There was silence for the remainder of the night. After the events of the day, Izuku was more worn out than he had ever been and even more unsure of what to do because his dreams were all but destroyed. Izuku felt compelled to look out his window, but he wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was because he had a long-standing legend in the back of his mind about making wishes while gazing up at the sky. Something about how your heart's wish might come true if you recite a poem while gazing at the stars. Izuku knew without doubt that he had only one desire in his heart, even at his young age. Izuku was relieved to see some stars in the night sky as he pulled back the window curtain. Even on a clear night, most stars were difficult to see due to the excessive city lights. It took Izuku a moment to recall the poem's words. Putting his hands together, he stared up at a single dot of light in the sky and recited them in his mind. "Star bright, star light, said the first star I saw this evening. I hope I might. Tonight, I would like you to have this wish." After reading the poem aloud, Izuku took a moment to express what he truly felt. "I wish to be a hero. One that protects the weak, one that inspires to be like All Might." For an instant, it felt as though the world had stopped. Izuku had the impression that his wish had been granted, which somewhat restored his hope for his dream. As though he dared not blink once during the entire moment, his gaze remained fixed on the single star he had wished for. However, Izuku blinked and felt his heart sink once more after that moment had passed and it seemed like the world went on. It was almost as if the gods above had considered his request and turned it down. When that thought came to him, Izuku allowed himself to blink. Primarily to prevent his eyes from drying out, but also to prevent tears from forming. Izuku noticed something about the star he had made his wish upon after raising his hands to wipe away the tears from his eyes. Because he was looking through a glass window, he was initially unsure. However, Izuku saw that the star had changed color, albeit only slightly, after opening his window to get a clear view. Although it was no longer white, it appeared to be a blend of blue and red. The young boy made the only logical connection he could think of after noticing the color changes and realizing that the star was moving from where he had first seen it. A shooting star was visible to him. Izuku kept thinking along this line and concluded that perhaps his wish had been partially heard and that something was providing him with an opportunity to express it clearly once more. The boy's energy and smile returned as a result of this. Izuku stuck his head out the window and shouted the only words he knew mattered to him, not wanting to miss what he believed was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I wish to be a hero. The entire time his gaze was fixed on the falling star. A smile remained on his face. He felt so excited that he nearly wanted to jump out of the window to catch the falling star because his little heart was thumping so hard in his chest. However, there was a tinge of bewilderment as soon as the excitement inside him increased. He started to understand how the star was falling. Izuku had to watch it fall for a few moments before he realized where it was going to fall. Occasionally, he and his friend Katsuki Bakugo would play in a small forest. Izuku saw the star descend further and land in a place he was familiar with. To see the star that had fallen from the sky, Izuku wanted to dash outside and go to the forest. If he had to drag his mother out of bed to do it, he might have. However, he could hear a faint sound coming from the other side of the door. So his hand instantly stopped grabbing the doorknob as he ran from his bedroom to his mother's room. The boy could just make out that his mother was still crying, even though it was hardly audible. When Izuku realized that his mother was still crying, his heart felt both at ease and then sad, most likely because she seemed to be aware that her response to the question he had asked her didn't accomplish anything that could be considered positive or at least positive enough. That was the last thing that made him want to go into the forest. Izuku had already asked his mother a question, and it appeared to be difficult to handle later. He knew enough, even as a boy, that asking her for anything more tonight wouldn't be appropriate. However, his curiosity about what fell into the neighboring forest was just strong enough to remain in his thoughts, particularly on the morning after. Since it was Sunday and the mother and son had visited the doctor on Saturday, he could at least persuade her to take a leisurely walk in the woods, where he would happen to find a section of the forest that had always been in his thoughts. Because of the pleasant weather for the season, Izuku was able to persuade his mother that he wanted to go for a walk in the forest and asked her to accompany him. He suggested that they simply needed to escape from everything, put yesterday's events behind them, and focus on today. It seemed to Inko, Izuku's mother, that her son was responding to the harsh deprivation of his dream by doing something more responsible for his age. Perhaps she was exaggerating the situation. Perhaps her son was recovering more quickly than she had anticipated. Regardless of Izuku's situation, Inko concurred that perhaps going for a Sunday activity that involved walking in the woods would be exactly what they both needed. Approximately 10 a.m. when the mother and son began their slow walk through the woods. Izuku advised them to simply choose a path and continue walking until they either arrived at the opposite side of the forest or felt hungry for lunch. Inko experienced a mixture of positive and slightly negative emotions when he said the final line while grinning. A part of her thought that perhaps her son was attempting to carry on as though nothing had changed for him and was in some sort of denial about what the doctor had told them. That he was still able to fulfill his dream of becoming a hero like All Might. Additionally, Inko thought that perhaps Izuku had another motivation for doing this. In the end, something so unexpected for him might have a real explanation. Inko believed she would have likely disregarded her son's request if she hadn't had that thought. She would come to regret not making that choice. In silence, the two of them strolled hand in hand. With every step, Inko's anxiety increased because she half expected her son to be talking endlessly about the items he frequently discovered in the forest. Even as his mother, Ink could see that Izuku was wearing a serious expression that she had never really noticed before. Izuku was not the type of youngster who was driven to give everything he had. She had observed that trait in his friend Katsuki Bakugo. Inko had even been informed by the boy's mother, Mitsuki Bakugo, that her son would always display a determined expression before taking action on nearly every task. For a brief moment, Inko thought that Izuku was likely beginning to adopt some characteristics from his friend, and he felt relieved that perhaps Izuku was growing more determined to not let his newly discovered quirkless status hold him back. In relation to her son, that did make her smile a little. Izuku was trying to recall the precise location in the forest where he saw the star land, which is why he was keeping quiet. He was aware that they were moving in the right direction, but he hadn't noticed anything unusual thus far. For what seemed like an hour, the two kept walking. Izuku's stomach was a little more empty than usual because he didn't eat anything else yesterday, and it decided to remind both him and Inko that lunchtime was approaching even though he had eaten breakfast. The roar of Izuku's stomach caused Inko to chuckle quietly, an action that even made him smile. Izuku noticed something that was really out of place and stopped before Inko could suggest that it was probably time for them to return. Because she wanted to know what had caused her son to stop, Inko followed his gaze and saw the same scene. One of the trees appeared to have been cut at the very center. The first person to rush up to it and take a closer look was Izuku. After catching up with her son, Inko questioned why he was interested in a tree in this condition. Even Inko was aware that a tree in a forest would eventually just fall apart because it was too old, too weak, or for any other natural reason. But when Inko looked more closely, he saw that the tree's condition didn't suggest anything natural. As if something larger than the tree itself had sliced it in two. In addition, the tree appeared to have visible burn marks. As if the fire had only started in those spots and not spread far enough to burn the entire tree. That idea alone was enough to give her a mental warning. Indeed, there wasn't much concern about a villain prowling the neighborhood. She was certain that Izuku shared her belief, and she never doubted it herself. However, yesterday's events forced her to think about things she would not normally think about. She wanted to get her son out of the forest as soon as possible because she was thinking about the worst-case scenario. She didn't move quickly enough, though, because her son had already run off. Inko did notice what was likely causing Izuku to move when she yelled for her son to stop running. Another tree appeared to be damaged. A sizable branch appeared to have been severed. Another tree followed that one, lying on its side as if its trunk had been broken as easily as a twig may be broken. Inko's eyes followed her son's movement to see what transpired behind the final tree. It appeared to be a random boulder taller than her son, but it was obviously split in two. Inko's thoughts connected the trees and the boulder as she ran after her son. Something seemed to bury itself halfway into the ground after flying or falling so quickly that it smashed through multiple solid objects. Inko looked around as soon as she arrived at the same location where her son had run just a moment earlier, supporting the idea that something struck the ground and flew in a straight line through the boulder and trees. Before turning her attention to her son and the item, Inko asked herself, what happened here? Inko was a little perplexed because her son was already staring at the object with wide eyes. At first glance, the object in front of her appeared to be a circular piece of silver. Although she couldn't identify what was on it, it appeared to her to be a pair of straps or buckles. Inko was a little taken aback by what she saw, but she did think that perhaps this was why her son had brought her out here in the first place. When she approached her son, she made the decision to ask him if that was the cause. Inko, however, now understood why Izuku was staring at the object with such wide eyes after she had walked around to see that other side of it. This side of the object had a very clear, perhaps even identifiable design, despite the fact that it was still partially buried in the ground. It had circular red and blue stripes with what looked like a star in the center. Inko's initial reaction to the scene was comparable to Izuku's at the same moment. Whatever this was, a young boy had a strong suspicion that it had once belonged to the greatest hero in history. Inko was the only one who thought that was a stretch, but she was aware that her son was most likely connecting the dots. How something like this got out here in the middle of the forest was another thing on her mind. Before they went to the doctor for Izuku's examination, the radio had said that All Might was essentially on the other side of Japan fending off a number of villains who were attempting to destroy a seaport for an undisclosed reason. There had also been no reports of villains attacking the area yesterday. It was possible that All Might threw it so forcefully in that battle that it ended up here. However, that theory would only have been effective if All Might had begun utilizing this item. Inko knew her son Izuku would have mentioned it earlier, even if it had only happened recently or had been a one-time event. Regarding how All Might switched up his outfit or used a different weapon to fend off villains. Although Inko wasn't as familiar with the appearance of all the pro-heroes, she was certain that few of them had color schemes or overall costume designs that would cause someone to think of All Might before anyone else. Even though All Might was the most popular hero, Inko was aware that every other pro-hero made an effort to stand out from the crowd. In light of that, Inko arrived at the query that was currently causing her a great deal of distress. If she had known what her son was thinking at the time, that might have been a more perplexing question. Izuku had seen enough pro-heroes and their gear to be able to identify it almost immediately. What fell from the skies last night was obviously a shield. The young boy's thoughts from the previous 24 hours were all going through his head. How he had been informed that he had no peculiarities at birth. How he had questioned his mother about his ability to be a hero. How he had shouted his dream into the night and made a wish for it. One side of him claimed that this was merely a coincidence, that the fact that he saw this fall from the sky and that it landed close to him was entirely coincidental, and that no one else knew about it because no one else discovered it before him. The other side of him told him that this was evidence that he would become the next All Might, the ultimate hero. That this shield was intended only for him. Even the old fantasy tale he had heard about the sword in the stone and how a common person was able to free it and go on to become a king with the sword in hand was invoked by that same side of him. This was a shield rather than a sword, and a shield is always intended to provide protection. At that moment, Izuku did feel as though he had a choice. He made a decision that, if he accepted the shield, would be the first real step toward realizing his hero aspirations. He was aware, however, that refusing to accept the shield would be equivalent to admitting defeat when the doctor told him he lacked a quirk. Even though he didn't want to acknowledge it, his mother's statement that she wished things were different after he asked her if he could still be a hero did cause him to think about something else. This shield in front of him was the result of two people's wishes. Izuku's young heart and mind only required that to make what he knew would be the most disastrous choice of his life. Izuku had hurried to the shield and grasped it as tightly as he could with his tiny hands before Inko could question her son about the circumstances. He knew that he was not very strong and that the thing in front of him most likely weighed 10 times as much as he did. However, that would not deter him in the least. Izuku exerted all of his strength to pull the object out of the ground at that precise moment when both hands were on opposite sides of it. Inko observed her son's actions. She could plainly see that her young son was exerting every effort to remove the shield from the ground. When Inko realized why her son was doing with everything he had to drag the partially buried object out of the ground, she was truly torn. She had witnessed her son's determination once before, and oddly, it had to do with All Might merchandise. According to her memory, it was during the time when a poster commemorating All Might's 10th anniversary was created, but it was never made available for purchase by the general public. She found it incomprehensible that they would promote a product but never put it up for sale. Inko questioned why combine something that would undoubtedly be well liked by the general public with something that was obviously counterproductive at its core, even if it was limited edition merchandise. Even so, her son continued to look everywhere for one to see if he could find one. Izuku visited every store within walking distance of their home that sold anything even slightly related to All Might. Inko reprimanded her son on a few occasions, probably too many, if she was being honesta when he conducted his search without her or even his friend going with him. Perhaps a child wandering off wasn't uncommon, but that was only due to a parent or babysitter who wasn't paying attention. A child doesn't have to locate a copy of his idol's poster. In fact, that caused her to think of something new. When they got back from the test, she couldn't help but remember that her son had watched the same All Might video, which she knew undoubtedly motivated him. After receiving the devastating news, she realized that she had hoped that perhaps after watching that video, her son's spirit would start to heal. She thought the doctor wanted to be cruel to her son at that precise moment because of the way he destroyed it so casually and without showing any empathy, especially for a child. Inko was aware that this might be the largest shot in the dark in history, or perhaps she was relying on some sort of illusory optimism. However, she restrained herself from acting as a mother would naturally do and observed her son's continued use of all the strength in his tiny body to free the object. For a moment she had considered lending a hand. She could lift the object out of the ground with some ease if she used her own quirk. She didn't think it weighed much, and it didn't appear to be composed of any heavy metal. But as soon as that thought crossed her mind, she slammed it down. Right now, her son was attempting to do something with everything that was inside of him, including his heart and soul. Since his resolute expression made it obvious that he was only focused on the task at hand, Inko knew her son would not have noticed her using her levitation quirk to allow the object to move even a little. She therefore took the action that she believed to be the better one at the time. She encouraged her son as a mother would. "You can do it, Izuku." Inko wanted to yell it, but she restrained herself from doing so because she was still afraid it would be a pointless endeavor. Izuku didn't answer, whether he heard his mother or not, but instead grunted in effort, which grew louder every time he attempted to remove the object from the ground. With every effort, he could feel his strength ebbing away, and he had to pause to catch his breath. Izuku retreated a step and had to put his hands on top of his knees after bending forward to prevent himself from toppling over due to the strain on his strength. He was breathing in breath after breath to fill his lungs, and his face was actually beady with sweat. Something appeared in Izuku's heart during the moment he took to catch his breath. That he only had one chance and that his dream would be dead if he didn't give it his all. He took a final glance at the shield and vowed in his heart to give this task his finest effort. Izuku planted both of his feet as firmly as he could, placed his hands back on the opposite side of the shield as he could reach, and prepared his body with as much strength as he could muster after catching his breath. Izuku heard his mother reiterate what she had said before he began. "You can do this, Izuku. You can." Izuku seemed to gain some strength from hearing that he was unaware he had left. Perhaps it was because his mother told him what he needed to hear this time. Izuku used all of his strength to free the shield from the ground after making sure his tiny hands could hold it firmly. With a hint of concern that the boy might not be strong enough to finish this task, Inko could only watch as her son did it. She even contemplated using her quirk to aid her son once more, and the idea grew more intense and intense in her mind with every second that went by. It seemed like forever to Inko, who had no idea how much time had gone by, to watch her son struggle to free the object. She even found it difficult to keep herself from helping her son with one hand while simultaneously raising the other to do so. It got to the point where she was unable to control herself and reached up to assist her son. As she watched the shield start to rise, she didn't care if she used her quirk at that moment or not. Although it was tiny and nearly invisible, she could see that her son hadn't stopped yet and that it had actually been raised upward. "It's working, Izuku. You're doing it. You're doing it," Inko exclaimed as her eyes confirmed that the object was gradually and steadily floating off the ground. Izuku thought that his heart would burst from his chest. Even though his hands and arms felt like they were on fire, he continued without hesitation. He did hear his mother start to applaud him, which encouraged him even more to work hard. Izuku's drive surged beyond boundaries. He was unaware he had the moment his sense of touch informed him that the shield was moving. The forest was silent except for Inko's yelling for her son, but when the metallic ring sound came, it seemed as though the whole world fell silent. Using only his bare hands, Izuku Midoriya lifted the shield off the ground. The boy was in such a state of overwhelming joy that he was unaware that, in his attempt to free the shield, he had stumbled and fallen flat on his back, causing the shield to fall on top of him. "Izuku!" Inko exclaimed as she saw her boy fall backward and something that might have been heavy fall on top of him. At that moment, she lifted her son's shield with her quirk and hurried to check on him to see if he was hurt. Inko looked everywhere for her son, like a worried mother would. She was unsure whether he had suffered a simple cut, fractured bones, or even suffered a concussion. Since the doctor had, in a sense, already done that to her boy, she was mentally prepared for the worst not the worst. However, she was clearly perplexed by what she saw. Izuku's expression was one of confusion rather than pain, and it appeared to reflect Inko's own. With a voice full of intense concern, Inko said, "Izuku, are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere?" Izuku initially remained silent. After staring at the sky for a while, he turned to look at his mother. "Mom, did you use your quirk to help me?" Inko's face took on the appearance of a thief who was caught with their hands in the cash register despite believing they were being cunning. However, she composed herself because she was aware that there was a fully legitimate reason for using her quirk. Inko was enumerating all the possible explanations her mother's side could come up with after witnessing the shield fall on her son. "Only to get it off of you. When it landed on top of you, I thought maybe it might be too heavy for you or it might smother you Aura. But, did you use your quirk when I was trying to pull it out of the ground?" Inko's face conveyed a genuine confusion rather than a sense of guilt. She considered telling her son that she had given it some thought, but she stopped herself in the middle of her sentence because she failed to acknowledge something that she always noticed when she used her quirk. She can levitate small objects thanks to her quirk, and if she has enough willpower, she can move something that might be a little heavy. However, it wasn't as though she could easily lift the sofa in their house, and each time she employed her quirk, Inko would feel the weight of the item. To put it briefly, she would feel as though she was lifting something as heavy as any teabag or dinner plate if she used her quirk to lift them. Even in the heat of the moment, when she used her quirk to move the shield off her son, she realized as she turned to face the shield that lay only a meter away from her and her son. It seemed as though she had lifted something as light as the microwave in the kitchen or a full garbage bag that is thrown out. On the surface, that might not seem noteworthy, but for Inko, it was unique because neither a microwave nor a full trash bag could crash through multiple trees and a boulder and survive. There were no obvious warping, cracks, or even chips along the surface, as far as Inko could see. Inko had a better idea of its size now that it was off the ground. It was nearly a meter in diameter and round. She was fairly certain that no metal in the world could be both so strong and so light, and she had no doubt that the material used to make that shield was far stronger than anything she had ever heard of. Izuku asks him more sincerely, "So, Mom? Did you use your quirk?" Inko was having some difficulty accepting the facts she had just made up in her mind, as she kept looking between her boy and the shield. She only agreed to the response she could provide to her son. "The only time I used my quirk was to get the shield off of you. I haven't used it for anything else today." Inko could see her son's head turning on its gears. Regarding the shield, she was reasonably certain that Izuku was coming to the same conclusions as she was. After the moment of his victory, Izuku discovered that the shield wasn't as heavy as he had thought it would be when he lifted it off the ground. It is true that he came to the same conclusions as his mother. He explained that the shield needed to be constructed from a material that was far more durable than anything else, and that most metals that could withstand being driven through trees and a boulder had to be heavier than a young boy like him could lift. He was aware that, within a specific weight range, his mother's quirk could lift objects. Izuku's mind was able to make a conclusion about what he currently knew because she was able to remove the shield from him without putting a lot of strain on herself, and he did believe her when she claimed that she didn't assist him in getting it off the ground. The fact that he had witnessed the shield plummet from the sky the previous evening supported that conclusion. He recalled a teacher telling him in class that if something crashes onto Earth from space, it appears to be on fire the whole time. Izuku rose from where he was lying on the forest floor, went to the shield, and grabbed it. Again, it wasn't as heavy as he had initially anticipated, but it was still heavy for him. With the shield in both hands, Izuku turned to face his mother and smiled as broadly as he could. Inko was relieved to be reassured that she would not see that smile again. But after he smiled at her, she knew exactly what her son was going to say, and she wasn't mistaken. "Can I keep it?" The first rule a child learns as they grow up and gain more knowledge about the world is that, regardless of age, there will be instances when the world is unforgiving. Shortly after the doctor's appointment, Izuku Midoriya's status as quirkless was revealed. After the doctor's examination, he remained silent the next school day, but eventually, his classmates found out about this fact. Katsuki Bakugo was credited with spreading the word throughout the school. Izuku did question why his friend would be so outspoken about it, as if Bakugo's method of spreading the word was necessary. However, on the day Izuku witnessed Bakugo and what might have been his best friend assaulting another child to the point where the child began to cry, that thought was forgotten and replaced by another. Izuku questioned Bakugo about why he was treating another child so cruelly. Izuku knew it wasn't right, but he wasn't sure what had happened to make it a 3-on-1 fight. Even though Izuku was aware that Bakugo's expression made it obvious he wasn't finished yet, Izuku still responded to the situation out of instinct. He threatened to stop Bakugo himself if his friend with the gaudy explosive quirk didn't stop harming the person behind him. His body trembled because he knew that he had just challenged someone he still thought of as a friend, and it was obvious that he would ultimately be pitted against 3 other people and their peculiarities. So, Deku the quirkless wonder thinks he can play hero, huh? Even more painful than the actual blows that were delivered to him was hearing that from his friend Bakugo, or Kachan, as he used to call him, before he and the other two charged at him. On an emotional level, anyway. Izuku's ears rang more from the words than from the actual ringing of the punch, even when the boy with the quirk of making his fingers grow longer to hold his head in place while Bakugo delivered a right hook across his face. After Bakugo and the other two exchanged blows with Izuku, he lay on his back and stared up at the blue sky for an unknown amount of time. Or rather, practiced using him as a target or punching bag. When his vision returned after being blurred by the blows to the head, Izuku made an effort to comprehend why the events transpired as they did. Izuku was certain that Bakugo aspired to be a hero like All Might. Both of them were so devoted to the mythical figure that he had heard their parents believed it was some sort of religious obsession, whatever that meant. Given this, Izuku was aware that All Might would only ever attack or even throw a punch when a villain was posing a threat to someone. Izuku was also aware that All Might would halt and ensure that no one in the immediate vicinity was in danger or harmed whenever a villain who believed they could defeat All Might was vanquished. No matter what the reason was, Izuku could see that Bakugo was not acting like All Might or even a hero, even if he did worship All Might. Izuku had a lot to consider as he returned home after that encounter. The boy's face now had a large bruise where Bakugo had punched him, but he was too preoccupied to consider what to say to his mother about the explanation for his current condition. In addition, when Bakugo grabbed the front of his shirt with one hand to punch Izuku with the other, it tore slightly around the collar. Lying to his mother was something Izuku disliked. primarily because she seemed to already know the truth before she even asked the question, and he was a horrible liar. Bakugo accidentally played a bit too rough today, he said, trying his best to reassure his mother. To his relief, Inko stopped pressing the issue, regardless of whether she believed what he had said. Izuku went back to his room to change his shirt and tend to the bruise on his face after being informed that dinner would be ready in an hour. He used the mirror in his room, which was situated atop his little dresser, to look at the purple patch on the left side of his face. He saw that there appeared to be some blood on the corner of his mouth as well, but nothing too significant. Izuku did wince at the unexpected increase in pain when he touched the bruise lightly, and he swiftly withdrew his hand in reaction. Izuku took stock of his current circumstances and then looked into his own reflection with eyes that were about to well up with tears. He could still hear Bakugo referring to him as Deku the Quirkless Wonder, repeatedly. His vision saw something in the reflection of the mirror that was the only thing preventing the tears from welling up and spilling freely. Izuku turned his head to see what caught his attention, and it was sufficient to stop the tears. The shield features a 5-point star in the center and stripes of red, white, and blue. Izuku approached it and, almost without thinking, put a hand on it. Not because he interpreted it as a symbol that a boy might interpret as a form of protection to help him deal with the world's unknowns. He wanted to remember, however, that what he had discovered in the forest was something that was unquestionably unique. It didn't seem particularly noteworthy at first, because it seemed to evoke such an image. Even he was aware that anyone who saw it would assume it had something to do with All Might. He was aware, however, and made every effort to confirm, that All Might had never possessed anything like this shield. Certainly a cape, but that was the only thing Izuku could recall about All Might in his earlier outfits. There were still many aspects of this shield that baffled the boy. First and foremost, it was lighter than it appeared to be. Izuku's small frame might make it difficult for him to move a full bag of trash, and this shield felt about the same weight in comparison. According to his mother herself, it weighed about 10 or 12 pounds in her hands. She even applied her quirk to it, stating that the amount of work or rather, lack thereof that she had to do to lift it actually surprised her. Inko suggested that it might have been a brand new frisbee that was intended for the Ua High Sports Festival and that someone had thrown it by mistake, which is why it ended up in their town's forest. Even Izuku supported that notion after seeing a number of sports festival activities online that demonstrated how the high school changed up its competitions each year. Inko posted a few flyers around the neighborhood and an online post about finding something in the forest and wondering if it belonged to someone because of that idea. Izuku was a little depressed about the possibility that it did belong to someone, but he was relieved that Inko had stated that they would give him 3 weeks to claim it, after which he could keep it if no one showed up. Izuku knew it was only right to follow his mother's example, even though it was somewhat embarrassing to hope that no one would come to their house and take the shield. Izuku continued to view the shield as a sign that his dream might still come true until that point. Using both hands, Izuku picked up the shield and, still in awe of its weight, raised it as high as he could. He had no idea why he was doing it, but in some way it served as a reminder to him that even boys are capable of doing things that others might not believe are possible. His eyes were fixed upwards, and that thought did make his bruised face smile and divert his attention from his surroundings. Izuku had forgotten that he had left his ripped shirt on the floor when he removed it to replace it when he stepped forward. Izuku lost his grip and fell backwards the instant his foot touched the shirt. In response to the circumstance, Izuku threw the shield from his grasp and flew backwards in an attempt to prevent himself from falling all the way to the ground. Izuku didn't see what happened, even though he couldn't stop himself from hitting the floor with a loud thud. Even though it was only a moment, he saw the shield he threw behind him as he fell backwards. It made a metallic sound as it bounced off the wall. After that, it flew forward, bounced off the wall across from it, flew back at the first wall it bounced off of, and then fell to the floor, barely missing the opposite wall once more. The noise Izuku made in his room quickly caught Inko's attention, and she rushed into it with a terrified expression on her face. "What happened in here, Izuku?" Inko asked, scanning the room for the source of the several noises that led her to believe that someone was attempting to smash through her son's room wall. Before coming up with a response that was the real deal, Izuku glanced at his mother and the shield a few times. Izuku pointed to the shield on the ground and said, I fell. I had the shield in my hands and I fell and threw it at the same time." Although Izuku's response came across as somewhat sheepish, it was the truth, so it didn't seem like he was lying to his mother. He wasn't concerned about getting in trouble for creating such a commotion. His mother might now think the shield was too dangerous to be in his hands, so he was more afraid she would take it away. In addition to observing her son in the shield, Inko also saw the ruined shirt that Izuku had previously worn on the ground. She was aware that her son was getting better at cleaning up after himself in his room, but he still occasionally left clothes on the floor. Izuku was lucky that Inko had a mental image of what her son had said unfolding as it did. She'd seen him a lot before, running around his room with an All Might action figure in his hand, acting or imagining that All Might was flying in his room or that he was All Might flying in his room. Content with the response, Inko only reminded her son to finish cleaning himself before dinner was ready and gave him a somewhat strict directive to always pick up after himself if and when he was going to run around the room. Izuku gave a nod in response and rose from his floor position to place the shirt where it belonged. Izuku followed instructions and threw it in the clothes hamper, but Inko made the final decision about whether it could be fixed or thrown away. Inko left Izuku's room to finish preparing dinner after noticing that. Izuku looked back at the shield only after he was certain that his mother was no longer concentrating on him. He repeatedly played back what he had witnessed in his mind. Since he smacked the back of his head against the ground when he fell backwards, Izuku was attempting to make sense of what he was seeing and determine whether it was a trick. However, his eyes did not deceive him each time he went over the memory. The shield did, in fact, somehow bounce off his bedroom's two opposing walls. Izuku knew he lacked the strength necessary to make the shield bounce off two walls that were obviously not adjacent to one another, but bouncing off one wall was a given because he recalled how forcefully he threw the shield when he fell. After the shield bounced off the wall in front of him, he remembered, and the realization struck him once more. That it made a second bounce off the wall behind him. Izuku's initial thoughts appeared to be at odds with his understanding of the world. A rubber object, such as a bouncing ball, would have to be thrown in order for something to bounce off two walls fast enough. However, there was nothing to suggest that the shield was even slightly composed of rubber. It was entirely composed of metal. The straps on the inside of the shield, which Izuku assumed were designed to allow the shield to be worn on the arm while being supported by it, were undoubtedly not made of rubber, nor were they attached to the walls once the shield had been thrown. The second idea was that it might have been subjected to a quirk that altered the characteristics of the metal. The boy thought that made sense because he had witnessed a number of villains who battled All Might do something to common materials like steel or concrete that caused them to melt or change shape. Izuku also saw a video in which All Might used his quirk to turn water into vinegar in order to save a child who had fallen into a river. Izuku was aware that a child, most likely his own age, might not always be very good at swimming. Furthermore, he questioned whether swimming in vinegar was equivalent to swimming in water. The more Izuku considered it, the more it seemed to be the answer. Perhaps someone else in the world had a strange ability that would make anything made of metal or possessing metal qualities be equivalent to hurling a rubber ball around the room. However, it also felt incorrect. Izuku was reminded by a persistent voice in the back of his mind that the shield was unique in and of itself. It had never had any quirk on it. Izuku used his tiny hands to pick up the shield once more, raising it to a point where he appeared to be able to make out his own reflection in the metal. The fact that he could see his face in the 5-point star emblem in the center of the shield wasn't particularly odd, but it also felt oddly appropriate to him. Izuku reflected on the night he had made his wish to the night sky before discovering the shield. How he put all of his heart into wanting to be a hero. His heart informed him that his wish had been granted that evening and that the person who was supposed to use this shield that had fallen from the sky was the one who truly embodied what it meant to be a hero. Izuku's mental leap that this shield was unique and that it was somehow meant to be with someone special might have been too much for any sane adult to comprehend. Izuku smiled at that conclusion, the kind of smile where a boy isn't just flashing his teeth but also shows how happy they are, to the point where their mouths are practically open. Izuku was now more certain than ever that this shield was intended for him to use on his path to becoming the next greatest hero in the world, despite the fact that his mother had posted notices asking if anyone in the neighborhood might be the original owner of the shield in his possession. Izuku reluctantly returned the shield to its original location in his room. This time, he was taking care to avoid throwing it by accident and making his mother unduly anxious. Well, any more than she most likely already was. Izuku went to his room's little desk and took out a notebook in which he had been writing. The writing was readable because it was in crayon, or at least Izuku was used. He kept this notebook to document everything he could learn or see about any hero or villain that he came across online or in the news. In the same drawer, he kept another notebook, which was initially intended to be used once Izuku had filled it up with all the information he could write down. The purpose of this one was different, but no less significant. Plans to become the mightiest pro-hero with a shield. Izuku wrote on the notebook's cover using a red crayon that was close by. As soon as he completed writing the cover, Izuku went on to write in the notebook's pages what he thought were essential steps to ensuring the plan's success. to be the hero he imagined himself to be. That was a fateful week that even a 5-year-old would find nearly impossible to forget. It was a week that inspired him to do more than he ever imagined he could in the ensuing decade. Izuku Midoriya became more active than he had previously been or would have been for a child his age, engaging in any and all activities that could help him become stronger and more resilient. He knew he wouldn't improve unless he gave it his all every day, even if that meant that in the beginning he could only run at his peak speed for less than 30 seconds. Izuku soon saw that he was growing stronger every day when he was able to run for more than 30 seconds without stopping to catch his breath. Additionally, he persisted in his daily research on the pro heroes and how to continuously improve one's physical appearance, seemingly excluding any mention of All Might. Although his mother may have considered it somewhat obsessive, she believed her son needed it to stay positive. Inko had some thoughts during those years that she couldn't fully put to rest. Over time, she began to suspect that her son was fighting, either at school or when he was outside the apartment, though she wasn't totally sure. She could see burn marks on shirts and even bare skin, despite Izuku's constant claims that he may have overdone his training. Inko did inquire as to whether her son Katsuki Bakugo was treating Izuku cruelly. As a mother to another, Inko could see that some problems had developed with her son over time and that she wasn't doing much to resolve them, even though some of Mitsuki's responses weren't particularly comforting. Both parents had to assume that Izuku and Bakugo were still friends because neither parent received a complete response from the school regarding whether or not her son and Mitsuki's son were fighting. Or at least until the opposite is evident. Izuku, however, saw his struggles and problems with Bakugo as a challenge. Izuku didn't let the taunting and remarks break him after it became evident that everyone at the school, including his teachers, classmates, and faculty, knew he was eccentric. Dealing with such things was easy on some days, but on others, he felt like his only option was to give up. Particularly when Bakugo made fun of his studies of other pro heroes and, nearly every time, advised him to end his life in order to spare the world his peculiar disposition. It always hurts to hear someone you once thought of as a friend tell you that ending your life is the best course of action. Reminding himself that he was dealing with the same issues that All Might was what prevented those words from becoming ingrained in his heart. The villains who opposed the symbol of peace and justice used almost every conceivable insult and foul language, and then some, on him far too frequently. The renowned hero never once allowed the words to make his smile falter in the slightest. In Izuku's opinion, that was a persistent problem that All Might dealt with, and not all of his exploits were meticulously documented. One thing Izuku noticed that appeared to be typical of pro heroes, including All Might, was that the antagonists they battled only had information that described the type of trouble they caused and the peculiarity they possessed or employed to carry out the crime or battle against pro heroes. Perhaps a few more details here and there, such as their self-name, but obviously nothing about what they said to the pro hero they were competing against, which made some sense because it was unlikely that any media or newspaper would want to cover the insults of villains who had been captured. And Izuku wasn't going to allow the fact that everyone called him the quirkless wonder to affect him in the same way that All Might had to deal with that without ever letting it affect him. His mother once told him an old proverb that goes, "Actions speak louder than words." Izuku proved to himself that he could still be a hero if he continued to get up after being put down by others. Even though it meant that Bakugo would knock him down nearly every day, he endured it all while everyone else at school laughed. As a 15-year-old in his final year at Aldera Junior High, Izuku was more motivated than ever to be a hero. It most likely gave him the extra energy he needed to run to school without having to breathe heavily. He had plenty of time to get to school, so he wasn't running late. It was a component of his ongoing training to maintain his physical fitness and improve his skills. According to some exercise books he had acquired over the years, jogging did help him build up his breathing and leg muscles. According to some, if properly developed over time, a person can run flat for longer and longer periods of time. Izuku believed that to be true, or at least true in relation to his body. Izuku was able to outmaneuver Bakugo and his two faithful followers on a few occasions when they decided to band together against him, leading them to pursue him through some of the back alleys. They were both fairly good tests to see how fast Izuku could run because Bakugo had learned to use his explosive quirk to have a sort of flight capability if directed properly, and Bakugo's quirk gave him bat-like wings that allowed him to achieve flight. Izuku discovered early on that Bakugo also used Izuku's runs as a form of training for him and his quirk, which made it easy to outrun the person who could fly with his bat-like wings because it appeared he either never considered developing them further or lacked the motivation to do so. Bakugo caught up to him a couple of times, but Izuku was able to outrun or outmaneuver him most of the time by taking advantage of his surroundings. Every time that occurred, Bakugo would use the next day to make fun of Izuku further or remind him that a person with a quirk is simply superior to 100 people without one. That made him even more determined to be a hero. Seeing Bakugo recover on his own made Izuku realize that he couldn't take it easy, not even for a second. Additionally, it required learning new techniques to improve one's mental and physical health. Even though jogging to school made his body stronger, he utilized what transpired in front of him to sharpen his cognitive skills and understanding. It was a rather typical scene that could occur at any time. It was a way to mess things up for someone who obviously had a pretty impressive quirk, since sometimes appearances weren't enough to tell if someone was male or female. At a train station above the streets, Izuku saw what appeared to be a shark-like figure, but who was obviously 3 times taller than a human, roaring like a savage animal and wreaking havoc with his or her arms. Izuku heard someone in the crowd stating that the person causing the public destruction had attempted to steal a woman's purse while the police prevented people from approaching too closely. When someone said that it was a foolish move to make in both broad daylight and when there were many people on the streets, Izuku agreed. The likelihood that a pro-hero would be on patrol at this time of day was high, and it was predicted that the pro-hero would apprehend the criminal almost instantly. Izuku caught a glimpse of something moving out of the corner of his eye at that moment. He grinned as he looked up and saw that it was Kamui Woods, the pro-hero. Although this new pro-hero had only recently entered the scene, Izuku had heard from all the websites that he was quickly establishing himself. A notebook to record pro-hero information was always available. Izuku believed that this was the ideal time to observe and document what Kamui Woods could accomplish for himself because he believed that at any given time something or someone new would emerge and the information would be useful later. Izuku could see that the pro-hero's movements were refined and well practiced as he moved around with his quirk, an indication that this person was aware of his potential. Izuku noticed other pro-heroes appeared, but he was unsure of how long the battle between Kamui Woods and the giant villain had been going on. Another pro-hero named Death Arms rushed in to grab the massive metal framework of the power lines before colliding with the ground using his super-strength quirk when the villain knocked over some high-tension power lines while attempting to attack Kamui Woods. Several pro-heroes would frequently show up at a scene like this, providing Izuku with additional details to record in his notebook. It was uncommon, though, for a teenager to scribble in a notebook and mutter about what he was witnessing. One of the men standing next to Izuku seemed to notice him the most out of all the people watching the fight between the two quirk users. Writing down what's going on in a fight and smiling while muttering, "Gotta say that makes you a most unique fanboy I've ever seen." Izuku responded with a sheepish smile as he turned to face the man. It wasn't as though having a passion for pro-heroes was inherently bad. In addition, a group of girls who were also watching the fight were shouting their love for Kamui Woods. Izuku couldn't contain his excitement as he watched Kamui Woods evade 2 more attacks while the villain yelled at him that they would shatter them to pieces. It's one thing to see a hero in action on the TV or internet video. It's a whole other and better thing to see them in action like this, his father said. His response was merely a smile, and he too turned back to the contest. Izuku's heart raced a bit more in anticipation when it became apparent that Kamui Woods was preparing to end the battle because he would be witnessing the special attack. The preemptive binding lacquered chain prison. The man next to Izuku shouted, "Take him on, tree man." Izuku didn't notice anything else until he heard a female voice yell out because he was so preoccupied with what Kamui Woods was about to do. Canyon Cannon. Izuku's attention was drawn to something he couldn't believe he hadn't anticipated. A second pro-hero, a giant blonde woman, charged into the fray and struck the villain's head with a powerful kick. The fight ended with that, but Izuku was more shocked by the woman's unexpected appearance as she was obviously larger than the villain. Although using sneak attacks to end a fight wasn't always a bad idea for pro-heroes, Izuku was genuinely curious about her origins. As she struck a pose that even Izuku knew was meant to elicit a particular reaction from at least the male members of the audience, the woman pro-hero said, "Today's my debut. Pleased to meet you all. You can call me Mount Lady." There were undoubtedly undertones in her voice as well. Izuku pondered whether this was a part of the legacy that Midnight, the R-rated hero, had established when she first turned into a pro-hero. Numerous other well-known pro-hero women in Japan had fan clubs devoted solely to their appearance, but the majority of them didn't make an effort to stand out for their appearance alone. This one in front of him appeared to Izuku to be traveling in the same direction as Midnight. Izuku then had to remind himself that pro-heroes were essentially government-supervised peacekeepers, and the best performers received the highest salaries as well as all the associated fame and glory. Their ability to maintain the limelight was crucial to their careers. Although Izuku didn't entirely agree with that aspect of being a pro-hero, The fact that they were civil servants meant that they would be compensated for their services. Izuku also took issue with the speed at which the majority of the men in the crowd pulled out their cameras and began photographing Mount Lady, particularly as she maintained her stated pose. Izuku wasn't positive, but he thought he heard some of them say the same word as they took pictures: money shot. Even after the fight had ended and the police had rushed in to restrain the villain before he regained consciousness, Izuku kept watching. Since there had been reports of other quirks that could cause people to grow large and some that required specific conditions to be met, he was curious to see what kind of quirk Mount Lady actually possessed. Izuku came to a number of conclusions after witnessing her shrink and become exactly the same size as a human. Clearly her quirk is gigantification. Definitely a powerful quirk, and she's got the looks and the attitude to instantly be a crowd favorite, but it seems to have a couple of obvious drawbacks, with the first one being the great risk to property damage if she intends to work in city and urban areas. She clearly has significant strength, easily amplified when she increases size, but can she control her quirk so she can be between her normal height and maximum height, or is there also a time limit to how long she is able to remain in such a state, since the bigger one gets, then the body might require more nutrients or even calories to maintain her giant forma. Huh. Never seen a fanboy mutter so much and take such extensive notes at the same time. Guess that means you want to be a hero too, huh? Izuku's habit of recording new quirks and pro-hero information in his notebook was broken by that. He turned to face the man who had said it and noticed that he was simultaneously grinning and giving him the thumbs up. Hold on to that dream. The world can always use another hero in the making. Make sure to aim for being the best. The fact that a rather strange person said that to him undoubtedly made him smile even more. Izuku said, "I will. Thanks," before realizing that he had to hurry to get to school on time. In a sense, this was the ideal opportunity to see how fast he could actually run if he put his all into it. Izuku arrived at his classroom just in time, and he took a seat that was just a step away from being at the back of the class. While the majority of the students paid no attention to him, a few others did. Even Katsuki Bakugo, who was just sitting there idly, seemed to be bored with everything. The teacher entered the room with a few pieces of paperwork and placed them on his desk when class finally began and everyone had taken their seats. The teacher discards the papers that were on his desk and says, "So, as third-year students, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures and what you want to do with your lives. I could pass out some career aptitude tests. But why bother? I know all of you want to take the hero track." The excitement they were all experiencing together caused the entire classroom to cheer and start displaying their peculiarities. Izuku wanted to participate in the class cheer, but he currently had no place in the cheer because almost all of his classmates were flaunting their quirks. Even though the other students were still gleefully showcasing their talents, the teacher remarked, yes, you all have impressive quirks, but you know it's against the rules to use them in class." Izuku acknowledged that some of his classmates had admirable eccentricities. However, he was also aware of what was going to happen once the teacher said, "You all. Hey, sensei, don't lump me in with these losers." In a split second, Bakugo captured the entire student's attention. Izuku wanted to sigh at the state of affairs, but he refrained. What was about to happen was standard procedure for this class, based on prior experiences. "As if I had anything like their crappy quirks." "Huh?" exclaimed Katsuki Bakugo, who left his feet up on the desk and continued to lean back in his chair. "Like you're actually better than us. Get over yourself, Katsuki. Man, does the ego on you have an actual off switch?" And other remarks were aimed at Bakugo. Although Izuku did agree with some of what was said, he chose to remain silent for the time being. Bakugo's response, "Shut up, extras should act like extras. Most of you will be lucky if you end up as sidekicks to some busted-down D-lister," caused the other students to quiet down sufficiently, but some continued to express how irritated they were with Bakugo. As he reviewed the information he currently had on the student, the teacher remarked, "Huh. Well, you certainly have impressive test scores. Maybe you will get into UA High." Izuku was impressed by how quickly the other students went from yelling at Bakugo to being shocked by what they discovered about Bakugo. He's going to try for the national school? The cutoff score for this year is 79, right? I hear they barely accept anyone. That place has a 0.2 acceptance rate, no matter what year it is. It's impossible to get into. On the other hand, it's likely that every oddball student in Japan was aware of the most prominent pro-heroes high school. It's impossible for extras to get in, but it's the only place worthy for someone like me. I aced the mock exams. I am the only student at this school who stands a chance of getting in," Bakugo exclaimed as he stood up and positioned himself on his desk. "Ah, the stupid chattering of extras. Izuku had to suppress a groan as he watched Bakugo caress his own ego with such ease. Izuku recalled that Bakugo would categorically declare that he had what it took to be a pro hero before they both started going to Aldera Junior High. Now, Bakugo wouldn't think twice about showing her, reminding the others why he was the best in this school, if not the entire nation, if given the chance. I'll end up more popular than All Might himself, not to mention I'll be one of the richest people in the world. People all across the world will know who I am. And it all starts with UA High. Izuku questioned whether Bakugo thought the other pupils would begin cheering after he made his announcement. They all undoubtedly had odd expressions on their faces, though some were merely envious or irritated with him. Oh yeah, Midoriya, don't you want to go to UA High, too? Izuku and the class were completely unprepared for that. So much so that when Bakugo heard those words, he appeared to freeze in place. Izuku scowled at the teacher because there was no justification for him to have said it aloud in the first place. However, as the quirkless wonder of Aldera Junior High, being made fun of for aspiring to be a hero seemed to be a part of his name, and the majority of the teachers either did it intentionally or without realizing it. For example, reminding the students that there was a real oddball in their class, regardless of whether it makes fun of him or not. At that point, every student looked from Bakugo to Izuku before they all burst out laughing at him. Even though Izuku was accustomed to his classmates making fun of him, it still hurt every time. You're kidding, right? There's no way you're getting into the hero course without a quirk. Good grades alone won't get you in, you know that. You hit your head or something because that sounds like the worst kind of fever dream to have. You can't get into a school meant to train those with quirks if you don't have a quirk yourself. Izuku got up from his chair to speak to his classmates. Actually, they got rid of that rule. Without question, getting in would be a challenge for anyone, but I could be the first one to pass the entrance exam who doesn't have a quirk. Izuku was more than ready for more jeering, but he didn't anticipate Bakugo's explosive response to his words, which included slamming his hand onto Izuku's desk and setting off an explosion powerful enough to knock Izuku back. Bakugo, who was emitting a lot of smoke from the hand he used to create the explosion, yelled at Izuku, "Listen up, Deku. You're even worse than the rest of these damn rejects, you quirkless wannabe. You really think they would let someone like you into their program when they could have me?" Izuku glanced at the instructor and saw that he was not surprised by Bakugo's recent actions. Just minutes earlier, the teacher had reminded every student that it was forbidden to use quirks on school property. Bakugo's quirk was particularly dangerous and could cause harm to someone, even if the irascible teen didn't mean to. Bakugo's intention was undoubtedly to be sent flying out of his chair as a result of using that quirk, and the teacher could not have missed that. According to Izuku, this is just another tragic illustration of how not only are people not created equal, but some people don't even care about equality as they get older. Izuku turned to face Bakugo and saw the rage on his face as well as his hand raised in the air, seemingly in preparation for a new explosion. He was a little anxious right now, but he understood that it was better to get up than to remain on the ground, and Bakugo seemed to do everything in his power to remind Izuku of this. "If you think I'm competing with you, you're wrong. I've wanted to be a hero ever since I was little. I may not have a quirk, but that doesn't mean I can't try my hardest. Just as any pro hero does." Izuku's statement was straightforward. Nevertheless, Bakugo seemed to get even more irritated by it. Bakugo glared at Izuku while holding both of his hands out in the air, smoke rising from each. Like an indication that his temperament and patience were evaporating. After saying, "You never be able to hang with the best of the best. You die in the entrance exam alone," he smiled harshly before continuing. "Defenseless Izuku. The school's already crappy and you really want to embarrass it more by failing so hard. Think about it, what you just said. You said you're gonna take the entrance exam just to try. What can you even do?" The fact that Izuku had no response for Bakugo actually annoyed him. The only response that anyone in the class was interested in hearing was the one that included the word quirk. Before the teacher reminded everyone to concentrate on their academic work and leave at the mocking they wanted to do to Izuku after school, the entire classroom was silent for approximately a minute. In response, Bakugo gave a harumph, and, after giving Izuku another glare, went back to his seat. Upon returning to his desk, Izuku noticed something about its surface that validated a long-held suspicion, which Bakugo's explosive quirk revealed when he slammed his hand on it. As of right now, Izuku's desk at Aldera Junior High would unavoidably have someone writing or scratching words on it every year. Works that described him as anything from loser to quirkless. He brought it up to the teacher a few times and was able to persuade him to give him a new desk by claiming that school property was damaged. In reality, though, the school only painted over the surface, as he had assumed. It was a useful way to solve an issue, but it also made him aware that he was still being made fun of for being oddball even if he didn't realize it. After that, the remainder of the school day went on. It wasn't like they all forgot what Bakugo had said or rather, shouted out, but it appeared that most of them were eager to get out of school when the school bell finally rang at the end of the day. Izuku didn't mind the others leaving, but he thought it was odd that Bakugo and his two supporters stayed in the classroom until there were just the four of them left. Bakugo approached Izuku as he was finishing packing his belongings into his backpack. Although he appeared to be bored right now, there were also hints of anger visible in his eyes. When Bakugo realized that Izuku had concentrated on him, he remarked, "Most first-string heroes show their potential early on. People just look at them and know they are destined for greatness. Make no mistake, Deku, that when I'm the only student from this garbage junior high to get into UA, people will start talking about me like that. They'll realize I'm legit, the next big thing." Before he finished expressing his thoughts, Bakugo flashed a smug smile. "That's not ego talking, I just know I'm that good." Bakugo himself claimed that he wasn't speaking from his ego, but Izuku could swear he heard one of the other two behind him use the word ego immediately after. Izuku would have prevented Bakugo from taking out the notebook he was using to write the one he used when he saw Kamui Woods and Mt. Ladia from his backpack if he hadn't heard that. Izuku reached out to retrieve it, but Bakugo slapped his hand away, holding the notebook as though he had just picked up a piece of trash. "Give that back," Izuku said. Bakugo glanced at the notebook with increasing disdain before turning to face Izuku. "You're still taking notes on pro heroes?" he asked. "Consider this a favor I'm doing for a worthless nobody like you, Deku." Bakugo created a small explosion that effectively burned the notebook by slapping both hands together while holding the notebook between them. However, it didn't stop there. Izuku watched as Bakugo tossed the notebook out the window behind him, in the same casual way that someone throws away a used napkin near a waste basket, regardless of whether it ends up in the waste basket or not, when it was obvious that the notebook would burn until it turned into a pile of ash. "Give it up, Deku, you may be good at running, but that only says you're good at running away from danger, and heroes always run towards the danger." Izuku felt compelled to respond, even shouting the words at Bakugo. However, it was clear from his eyes that Bakugo would not hear anything he said at the moment. Before one of Bakugo's two supporters mentioned leaving the quirkless wonder, before his loser stench stains their school uniforms, the two teenagers simply stared at one another for a short while. The adolescent boy was attempting to control his rage as the three of them left Izuku. He wanted to lash out right now because he was told to give up his heroic dreams. However, it seems that someone chose to add salt to Izuku's freshly inflicted wound or knew that was how he was feeling. Bakugo actually grinned at Izuku when he said, "You know, if you really want to be a hero that badly, there actually might be another way. Just pray that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life and take a swan dive off the roof of this school." The other two teenagers noticed and exchanged glances, believing Bakugo had gone too far with that remark. When Izuku heard that, he couldn't help but glare at Bakugo. All Bakugo could do was respond with a smug smile and another display of his explosive quirk. It took some effort, but Izuku managed to control his rage, which caused Bakugo to laugh and the other two to remark on how Izuku demonstrated that he obviously lacks the will to fight. Izuku went down to where he noticed his notebook after they had left. Izuku thought it was odd that a notebook thrown out the window would end up in the school's fish pond, but it was burned and wet, and some fish seemed to be nibbling on it. When Izuku noticed his reflection in the water's surface, that thought vanished from his mind. To remind him that it wasn't the first time Bakugo had said that exact thing to him, his mind was replaying the last thing he had heard from Bakugo. Izuku simply ignored it since Bakugo's initial statement to him didn't hurt. However, Bakugo would now always say that Izuku should commit suicide simply because he lacked a quirk whenever he felt the need to. His mind was troubled by those thoughts more than usual. He had no idea why this time was any different from all the others. Perhaps it was due to the idea of entering UA. High wasn't as genuine as it is now, and it's possible that Izuku threatened Bakugo in some way. Izuku laughed at the last part because he knew that he would never, ever be the one to threaten Katsuki Bakugo, he would never be the one. Izuku concluded that it was not worth the time to consider, regardless of the circumstances. Over the past 10 years, he hadn't done everything he could to get into the physical condition he knew he needed to be in order to use the shield. In addition to being an insult to himself, wasting even a single minute on such melancholy thoughts would imply that he was unworthy of the objective that the shield stood for. Izuku forced himself to recall what he had discovered about the shield after his mother had stated that it was officially his since no one had come to claim it. His initial idea was to conduct an experiment with a hammer and multiple eggs to test how effective the shield was at shielding something. Even though he was still a young boy at the time, Izuku quickly learned two things by using a hammer to strike the shield as hard as he could while it was covering the eggs. When the hammer struck the shield, it immediately rebounded with the same force that Izuku had used to swing it. Izuku was surprised when he somehow fully body vaulted backwards, resembling an action figure that fell forward and then had his fingers flicked backwards. He had used all of his weight and strength to bring down the hammer as hard as he could. Using a couch to jump off of in order to increase the force of the hammer hitting the shield was the second thing he learned, though he wasn't sure why he had thought it was a good idea in the first place. Izuku's entire body bounced off the shield and onto the other side of the room as a result of the test, which began with him leaping off the couch and bringing the hammer down as he hit the floor. Izuku needed a moment before he tried something else with the shield because he landed on the floor with a hard thud. He was relieved that his mother was out shopping at the moment and wouldn't be returning for at least an hour. It was surprising that none of the eggs covered by the shield cracked when I double-checked their condition. Izuku was aware that some powerful metals had a tendency to flex when struck with enough force, but only momentarily, and the condition of the eggs indicated to him that the shield was indeed composed of a rigid metal. Although it took some effort, he used the eggs to prop the shield off the ground at 4 points during the last test of the day. Given the likelihood that the eggs would simply shatter under the weight of the shield, he wasn't sure why this kind of test seemed necessary. However, Izuku seized the opportunity to strike the shield with the hammer once more when it didn't happen immediately. Since he had previously ended up flying after striking the shield, he chose to just toss the hammer onto it this time. He is still surprised that the hammer landed exactly in the center of the shield on the first attempt and bounced off it roughly as high as it had when Izuku threw it. Seeing that caused Izuku to forget the eggs he had used to lift the shield off the ground, so he had to gather himself. For an instant, there was no indication that any of the 4 eggs had been cracked. One eventually did, but it appeared to be because of the shield's weight rather than Izuku's use of the hammer. At the time, Izuku's only thought for analyzing the shield was to perform that test. In addition, he couldn't continue using eggs because his mother would start to wonder why she needed to keep purchasing more. However, the test results were more than sufficient to give a young boy an idea of what else the shield might be capable of. Izuku took the shield to the same nearby forest when he was old enough and strong enough to carry it by himself. He wanted to make sure that what he had previously seen of the shield bouncing off his walsa was real or just a coincidence. Izuku used both hands to throw the shield at what appeared to be a sufficiently flat and hard surface, which was the shape of a rather large boulder. Izuku wanted to see how strong he was at the time, but his throwing technique nearly required a full body spin to ensure that enough momentum was achieved. Izuku had a mediocre reaction time at the time, but it was too slow to catch the shield when it bounced off the boulder and came back at him. When the shield returned, it easily knocked him flat on his back and took the air out of his lungs because he had thrown it at about chest height. Izuku was genuinely pleased with what had happened to him, despite the suffering he experienced that day. It took a few years, but it was worthwhile to know that what he had witnessed as a child about the shield was real. He wished he could have responded when Bakugo was essentially yelling at him about what he could do, and those memories associated with the shield provided it. Izuku Midoriya would emerge as a hero in his own right, smiling as he was motivated by his hero All Might and carrying the shield. Some would argue that by having such dreams and thoughts, he was purposefully denying reality. However, Izuku would explain to them that the everyday world wasn't as like a comic book as it is today. Izuku would later come to understand that he should have followed this rule because, on his way home, he chose to take a different route that passed through a park with a tiny tunnel that ran beneath it. About halfway through, he heard a loud rattle from the manhole cover he had just passed, and then something that appeared to be easily dangerous appeared. It had a mouth and eyes, but the eyes alone conveyed that it was anything but amiable. The creature exclaimed, "Ah, good. A meat suit that I can hide in," before launching itself directly at Izuku and engulfing him nearly entirely. Izuku didn't have time to react because it had happened so quickly. Though that was all he could vividly remember, his mind did register that what had come at him was a villain. The next thing that came to mind was that there was a slime villain of some sort forcing something down his mouth while simultaneously choking him to death. The voice, which sounded like someone talking with their head underwater, said, "I didn't expect to run into him in this city of all places. Guess it's wrong time and wrong place for the both of us. Still, even he won't think to look for me hiding in a meat suit until I get clear of the city. So thanks for all your help." Izuku was attempting to grasp whatever it was holding to him by scratching at anything. However, every time he attempted it, it felt as though he was only grasping beach sand that was submerged. "Don't bother, kid, my bodies isn't gonna be ripped off so easily, so just be a good little boy and die already." Izuku sensed that darkness was beginning to creep in on him. There was nothing he could do as his strength and oxygen were dwindling. He wanted to beg for help from anyone who might hear him. This was not how he wanted to pass away. A sudden rush of wind swept over him, the last thing he remembered clearly before the darkness engulfed him. "Is this the sensation you get when your soul departs from your body?" he thought. Izuku didn't know how much time had gone by when he started to notice something. Something that, if he was dead and this was the afterlife, certainly didn't seem right. He thought someone was giving him a fast slap across the side of his face. "Hey, wake up," he heard. "And, are you okay?" Izuku hoped it was sufficient to let him know he was still alive. He opened his eyes to discover who was slapping him slapping him back to life. "Oh, good. For a minute there I worried. Sorry you got caught up in my hero work. I chased the vile villain into the sewer system and, well, to be honest, I got turned around a bit." Izuku needed a minute to process what he was seeing in front of him, or who it was. There was no denying that the man grinning in front of the teenager was All Might, the top pro hero in Japan, if not the entire world, despite his streetwear. All Might displayed the slime villain's current state, enclosed in a large soda pop bottle, and exclaimed, "But with your help, citizen, I was able to catch the dastardly fiend." Given that he recalled that the villain could have likely filled a few baths at public lavatories, Izuku may have questioned how that was possible. However, the symbol of justice and peace that stood in front of him consumed all of his thoughts. All Might, in the flesh, standing Haria. Wow, he actually looks so cooler in persona, Izuku said, his voice barely audible above a whisper. It was only when his mind finally realized that he was truly with All Might that it went into full fanboy mode. He frantically searched for his notebook in order to obtain the renowned hero's autograph. He reached for the one that Bakugo had previously damaged when he saw it on the ground and started practicing how to best sign All Might. He didn't realize All Might had already signed his notebook until he was searching for a blank page to use. Izuku was so pleased and appreciative to see that signature that he repeatedly bowed before All Might, thanking him and explaining that All Might's signature in the notebook would be a family heirloom that would be passed down for many generations. All Might made sure the bottle containing the villain was safely in his large pants pocket before saying, "Well, I must be off. Gotta get this guy to the police. A hero's work is never done, you know." Izuku broke out of his fanboy mode when he heard that from All Might. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Izuku was aware that All Might received fan mail with questions about anything and everything, but it was likely that he wasn't personally responding to any of them. It seemed as though some of the questions or the answers to some of them were pre-written, even if and when he conducted in-person interviews. Wait, is that all? Is he simply going to go? No, I still have a lot of questions for him. Izuku pondered in his mind. He was aware that there would never be another opportunity to ask the questions he was now asking, and that none of the responses he received would feel genuine. Before jumping into the air, All Might performed a few leg crunches to ensure he had a stable position. He was totally oblivious to the teenager's expression because he had his back to the person he had just saved. He might have spent a few more moments with this person, but he was concerned about the time limit because he couldn't afford to waste what time he had left, and stopping the villain he was chasing took longer than he had anticipated. The tall, superhumanly strong man bowed his knees once more before continuing to speak. "Now stand back, I'm taking off." As soon as he finished speaking, All Might threw himself into the air using the strength in his legs. "Thanks for your continued support," All Might shouted to one of his fans as a parting remark. Even though he might never see him again, he thought he could at least let the teenager know that All Might acknowledged him as a fan. The longer you work in this field, the more fans you'll get, and after a few decades, All Might was certain that his fan base would likely equal the combined population of 3 Japanese cities at the very least. All Might realized something was wrong a few seconds into his flight because he didn't seem to be flying as quickly as he had anticipated. At that moment, he became aware of an excessive weight on one of his legs. It would have been an understatement to say that he was taken completely by surprise when he turned to see what it was. The teenager he had just saved was wrapped tightly around his left leg. All Might shouted, "Hey, hey, what are you doing?" as he struggled to break free of the teenager's hold. "Let go already. I love my fans, but this is too much." "Wait, don't. If I let go right now, I'll fall and die." When All Might realized something so clear, he stopped trying to break the teenager's hold on his leg. "Oh, that's a good point." When All Might looked back at the teenager's face, they couldn't help but laugh at how their flight through the air was somehow making the teenager's face take on funny shapes. Most likely because he was trying to speak while the wind was blowing so fast past his face. "You're my all-time favorite hero, All Might. There is so many things I want to ask of you." All Might grabbed one of the teenager's arms to ensure he wouldn't abruptly release it while they were still in the air and said, all right. Just close your eyes and keep your mouth shut." As he tried to predict where he would land safely, he looked ahead. He used his right hand to stifle a cough at the same moment, but something felt like it was leaving his mouth. Because his time limit was justified, he didn't need to see that it was a drop of his own blood leaving his mouth because the sensation was more than enough to convey his concerns. "Shit, you have to land quickly." Before locating an appropriate rooftop to aim for as a landing spot, All Might pondered. Making sure the additional weight on his leg didn't lessen the impact upon landing was particularly challenging. All Might decided he had wasted more than enough time after he was certain the teenager was still okay as someone who claimed to have just witnessed their life flash before their eyes. "That was a rather foolish thing you did." Might disliked reprimanding others, much less a fan, but the teenager's behavior required some explanation. Once he was certain that there was a door leading to the building's rooftop, he instructed the teenager to knock on it, and someone would eventually come and open it for him. The teenager said, "Wait a minute," as All Might started to move toward the rooftop railing in anticipation of taking off once more. "No, I don't have time to wait." All Might was growing irritated, but his main concern was how long he would be able to maintain his current form. "Can someone without a quirk be a hero like you?" was the most significant question Izuku had in his heart and the only one he knew needed to be asked out of all the ones he wanted to ask. In other words, would people take advantage of the one opportunity when asking a question matters the most if they could only ask one question in their lifetime and knew the answer would mean more than anything else? This was the turning point for Izuku Midoriya. For a year, he could ask 100 random people on the street and 100 random heroes every day, and Izuku would know that no one's response would be more significant than the last. When it came to Izuku's dream question, this man in front of him, a legendary hero for Decadessa, was the only one who not only had the answer, but it was also the last word. There was always that voice in the back of his mind that came the day the doctor told him there was no chance he would develop a quirk, despite all the work he had done to improve himself and show everyone that he could one day be a hero. On some days it was quiet, on others it was loud, and on still other days it was silent. But now that he was in front of Japan's top pro hero, the voice in his head was practically screaming that Izuku had witnessed what it takes to be a hero and that, no matter what he does, he will never have even half of what All Might has. There were a few questions that All Might anticipated being asked. Some were common to his fans, some were unusual, and some, in his opinion, were just plain strange. But the question this teen just asked him was the first time he had heard something he had asked himself in years. All Might became motionless as a result of the numerous unpleasant memories that flooded his mind. Izuku chose to give All Might some background information on his question in order to help him understand it, even though it might have appeared that he was waiting for the teenager to explain what it meant. Izuku wanted to say everything but chose not to. "Because I don't have a quirk, well, maybe that's not the only reason. But I've always been picked on." He was aware that he needed to include the most important part of his question. "That's why. Maybe that's why. I think saving people is just about the coolest thing someone can do." After controlling his memory and considering the question, All Might did listen to what the teenager had to say. "Without a quirk, you say?" All Might asked, turning to face the teenager, who was twitching his thumbs and averting his eyes. He made the decision to give the fanboy what he believed to be the truthful response to the query. However, he was stopped when he felt his body suddenly weaken and steam began to rise everywhere. There was nothing he could do to stop what happened because the time limit had passed. They say no one can be a hero without a quirk, but I think they're wrong. Izuku, keeping his eyes far from the spot where he knew All Might was, took a deep breath to ask the one question that was on the back of his mind once more. Without a quirk, can I still become a hero? He was looking at All Might's direction to see what kind of response he would receive from his favorite hero when he noticed a man standing in the middle of the smoke or steam, barely above a living skeleton, staring back at him. Izuku imagined the analogous needle stopping on a record that was playing on an LP. Just a few moments before, he could have sworn on his life that All Might was standing where this scrawny man was. His response wasn't unexpected. The teenager's startling yell was loud enough, but it did slightly irritate All Might. Primarily because he had to trust that his fanboy didn't blab on the internet about what he was going to reveal and explain what was happening to him. All Might thought about deceiving the teenager by claiming that he was a pro-hero who also went by All Might and that, for a limited period of time, his quirk enabled him to mimic other people and their skills. All Might decided against it even though it wasn't totally a lie because it wasn't the whole truth and he would be insulting the fanboy in many ways if he answered his question with anything less than the truth. All Might showed Izuku the rather large scar on the side of the teenager's body after getting him to promise to keep what he was about to say a secret. He explained that he had lost most, if not all, of his stomach and had a seriously damaged respiratory system as a result of getting it in a fight more than 5 years prior. He suffered from the effects of all the surgeries he had to have, which ultimately limited his hero time to roughly 3 hours every day. The teen inquired as to whether his conflict with the antagonist Toxic Chainsaw was the cause. Although All Might was impressed that the teenager was aware of the fight, he informed him that, despite Toxic Chainsaw's terrible reputation, he didn't think he was a worthy villain. Or at least not as bad as the one who injured All Might so severely. All Might clarified that he took the necessary precautions to ensure that the world would never learn of the battle he nearly lost. He claimed that the world needed to know that the symbol of justice and peace would never be intimidated by evil and would always be smiling. All Might laughed at himself when he had a sort of epiphany. And being the guy that always saves people with a smile on his face, I have to make sure that the people don't know that there is plenty of fear behind said smile. I guess the main reason why I smile is to mask the overwhelming pressure and fear that I feel at times. Izuku listened to All Might talk to him in silence. Izuku thought All Might was yelling the words at him, even though they were spoken at normal volume on the surface. Every word appeared to break or chip away. Make no mistake, young man. A pro-hero should always be ready to risk their lives. It's just that, sometimes, villains can't be beat without powers. All Might's last statement struck him like a dagger to the heart. Although it was painful, it was not as painful as what he was going to hear next. All Might stated as gravely as he could manage, so no, I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. Additionally, it seemed as though All Might was not twisting the dagger that pierced his heart to ensure that the kill was verified. Izuku tried his hardest not to show how much All Might's words made his chest hurt. I see ya. His eyes were itching to well up with tears, and he hoped they didn't. Not for a while, anyway. Despite being aware of what he had said, All Might felt compelled to say more. If you want to help people, there are plenty of other ways to do it. You can become a police officer. You may get a lot of crap because heroes capture most of the villains, but it is a fine profession. Since some police officers did have peculiarities but weren't exactly pro-heroes either, there was some truth to it. Even All Might knew a man who, in his opinion, was a model police officer, and he demonstrated his abilities without any peculiarities. All Might left his position on the roof and went to check if the door was unlocked. Fortunately, he couldn't use his muscle form anytime soon because his time limit had been reached, so jumping down to the street was out of the question. All Might thought that his words might have been too harsh before he entered the room. In his career as a pro-hero, All Might had witnessed the teenager's expression enough times to recognize how it reflected his innermost feelings. The individual's entire world abruptly collapsed in front of them. All Might expressed the ideas that remained in his own head, regardless of whether it would appear that he was doing it to allay his own guilt or perhaps to let the teen know that there was still hope for him. It's not bad to have dreams, young man. Just make sure your dreams are attainable, realistic, understand. Having said that, All Might vanished into the stairwell beyond the door. Between what he was told, what he knew, and what he felt in his heart, Izuku's mind was as confused as it could be. Izuku was told the one thing almost everyone else told him by the no. One pro-hero, the symbol of justice and peace, the person he had always admired, and who had even saved his life only minutes before. Something he didn't want to hear but also knew. Izuku Midoriya was born without a quirk, which was necessary to be a hero. It's possible that the teenager remained motionless in his position on the roof until the sun set. But Izuku's curiosity about what villain appeared and which pro-hero was at the scene prompted him to rush as fast as he could to the scene when he heard a distant explosion and saw a huge column of smoke rise not too far off in the distance. His mind immediately replayed the response All Might had given him to his query as soon as his hand reached for the door handle to open it. Izuku's curiosity was stifled by that alone, which further contributed to his depression. He didn't really care where his walking legs were taking him as he descended the stairs and left the building, his mind essentially operating on autopilot. He read the information he had written in the burned notebook, but he wasn't totally sure why. Reading his practical and oblique observational notes on Kamui Woods and Mount Lady. A final effort to recall his original motivation for wanting to be a hero. Or perhaps it was a sort of farewell because he was now certain that he had been escaping reality, that he had been secretly aware of the truth the entire time. Izuku had never been so depressed in his life, regardless of the circumstances. In fact, he felt as though this was the worst period of his life, much worse than when he was told he had no quirk. His desperate attempt to disprove everyone, including himself, became clear to him as a result. He basically ran as hard and fast as he could from the truth in everything he did over the years. Izuku was so depressed that he failed to recognize the Tetuan shopping district as the place he had walked to and that the fire and smoke he had witnessed from the rooftop were being caused by the same slime villain that All Might had vanquished and captured. Upon recalling how All Might had apprehended the slime villain and which pants pocket he had placed the soda bottle in, Izuku recalled that All Might had changed because the aforementioned pants pocket was entirely empty. He was so preoccupied with seeing All Might in this state that he failed to notice the obvious, and it was only now that he remembered. This established a link between the slime villain's interference and the harm and devastation he was causing. The bottle wouldn't have been knocked out of the pocket if Izuku hadn't clung to All Might's leg as he launched himself into the air, or All Might would have realized before the villain woke up and began wreaking havoc like it was now. Izuku was conscious enough to hear some conversation among the throng of onlookers, despite all the thoughts racing through his mind that told him he was to blame for what was happening. He overheard one of them inquire as to why none of the assembled pro-heroes were taking any action to halt the rampage. According to someone, the slime villain had taken a child hostage, so the pro-heroes might have met their match and, if not, they were powerless to do anything right now. Izuku was extremely alarmed to hear that because he didn't know how long it lasted, but the slime villain nearly killed him by suffocating him. If the slime villain had a hostage, there was no question that it was harming the person in the same way that it had him. In addition, Izuku observed that none of the pro-heroes battling the villain were doing anything to stop the slime villain and were primarily attempting to minimize any harm. Even Mt. Lady, in her giant form, caught his attention, but she was not helping either. Mount. Lady couldn't do anything at all in the slime villain's current location because it was too small. In this case, all the pro-heroes and their eccentricities were completely pointless. He was already blaming himself because he believed that the slime villain would not have been allowed to cause this kind of chaos if he had not done what he did with regard to All Might. When someone in the crowd remarked that the slime villain must have been the same one that All Might had been pursuing earlier, Izuku began to blame himself even more. According to someone else, All Might would not have been able to defeat the slime villain or capture it. Someone then questioned why no one had contacted All Might to assist the heroes. No one at the scene was obviously aware that All Might had reached the time limit he had given Izuku and that, as a result of Izuku, he would not have been able to stop the slime villain, much less save the hostage it had taken. He was solely responsible for this incident. He kept telling himself that repeatedly in his mind. Someone is going to come and save the day. I'm positive. A true hero will arrive soon. Izuku reassured himself. Until he could clearly see who the slime monster had captured, he kept saying that to himself. Izuku Midoriya undoubtedly saw Katsuki Bakugo's terrified face partially immersed in the slime villain. Izuku's whole mind went blank the instant he realized what he saw, or rather, who he saw. There was nothing else around him now. Izuku didn't intentionally choose what transpired next. He was moving more quickly than ever before. He sped past the pro-heroes and the crowd, so fast that they only noticed that someone was sprinting straight at the slime villain. Unbeknownst to Izuku, All Might was also present at the scene and was in the midst of berating himself for his failure to perform an action that all pro-heroes were expected to perform without hesitation. When the fanboy who had earlier asked him if he could still be a hero without a quirk ran straight at the slime villain with a purpose, he nearly missed it. Additionally, the sight demonstrated to All Might that none of the other pro heroes the teen ran past stopped in their tracks. "Stop, you idiot, you're gonna get yourself killed." All Might was totally focused on what was going on, even though he heard the pro hero Death Arms shout after the child. Until he was close enough to hurl his backpack at the slime villain, he watched as the teenager blasted through flaming debris. Whatever was in the backpack, the slime villain's reflexive reaction was caused by something, and it was obvious why. His eyes were more susceptible than the rest of his body, which may have been a semi-liquid form. The teen's actions created an opening in which he started to claw at the body in order to assist in freeing the other teen who was being held captive by the slime villain. All Might knew he was correct to describe himself as pathetic in that instant, in that very sight before him. Even more so after hearing the teenager say something that made him realize that point. "I couldn't just stand there and watch you die." All Might needed that to remind him that he had to take action, no matter the consequences. It hurt a lot to force himself to change, but he overcame it and made his move just as the slime villain was about to hit the teenager in the following seconds after he had recovered. The slime villain's attack on All Might's arm was powerful because it sent a shockwave that sent some of the ground's burning debris flying. "I really am pathetic." Izuku had prepared for the attack, but when he saw that All Might had blocked it and heard him call it pathetic, it confused him rather than reassured him of what was happening. All Might knocked the slime villain's arm away, then reached forward to seize the hostage and free him. "I told you the traits that make a great champion, but I see now I wasn't living up to my own ideals." All Might said, "Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero." After Bakugo was set free, the slime villain cursed All Might and made a last-ditch effort to murder him. However, All Might was already preparing his next move by delivering his Detroit Smash, a specialty punch. Since Bakugo and Izuku were both unconscious, the force of the punch was more than enough to instantly destroy the slime villain, and the ensuing gusts of wind were a bit too much for them to handle. Even though it was impressive to end the fight against such a formidable opponent, All Might unintentionally contributed to his notoriety and legend by causing the blue skies above them to abruptly turn to rain with his Detroit Smash. Even the assembled pro heroes were impressed, with some speculating that All Might was responsible for the spontaneous storm's ability to simultaneously extinguish all of the fires that were still burning in this area of the shopping district. After the rain stopped and the pro heroes had collected every scrap of the slime villain, they took their time criticizing Izuku for his carelessness and applauding Bakugo for his courage. The reporters who appeared out of nowhere caught All Might and started questioning him about everything that had happened. Izuku was released by the pro heroes after they believed they had convinced him of their point. Izuku observed that a few of the other pro heroes continued to compliment Bakugo, with some even stating that they would be delighted to have him as a sidekick if and when he becomes a professional. Izuku chuckled at the scene but ignored it as he began to make his way home. When he got home, he knew he was going to be chewed out even more. The first reason would be being late for school, but since the reporters were already talking about All Might's most recent work as the No. 1 pro hero and likely mentioning how 2 junior high school students became involved, Izuku could already hear his mother yelling at him that his hobby of documenting information about pro heroes and villains didn't require him to get up close and personal to the point where his life was in danger. He was pondering the best way to express his regret to All Might. He knew he would have to keep some of the information All Might told him secret, but he thought it would be best to post it on his fan website. Just then, he heard a voice behind him that sounded all too familiar. "Deku." Izuku was intrigued at the moment when he turned around and saw Bakugo sprinting towards him. Although Bakugo was aware of Izuku's residence, this was likely the first time Izuku had ever seen Bakugo on this suburban block in some years. After taking a breather from his strenuous running and approaching him within 10 meters, Bakugo leveled his gaze at Izuku before he spoke. "I never asked you to save me. As if you could. Huh, well, I could have beaten him myself." It would be an obvious understatement to say that Izuku was perplexed by the words that Bakugo was shouting at him. "How dare a quirkless failure like you pity me? Trying to win me over. Don't you dare mock me." Then it dawned on him. Izuku noticed that Bakugo's ego was in pain and in need of some kind of reminder. Bakugo had also made sure to prove that his quirk was unbeatable on its own, since he had always made it a point to remind Izuku that the world did not accept quirkless people. And if that were true, if it was undeniable in Bakugo's mind, then the fact that he was unable to escape the slime villain with ease presented a reality that Bakugo found difficult to accept. You're just some quirkless failure that won't even cut it as a rent-a-cop. You didn't help me. You did nothing, so don't think you can look down upon me. Bakugo walked away with a sour attitude, turning his back and shouting one final thing. You're a useless nerd, and don't you forget it, I don't owe you anything. That essentially validated it for Izuku. Today, Bakugo's pride suffered. There was no doubt about that, but it would likely take some time to find out how bad of a hit it was. Izuku thought that nothing Bakugo had said to him at that time was worth considering. The question that was burning in his heart had already been answered by his idol. Even though the response didn't make him feel better, it was still an answer. Now that being a pro-hero was definitely out of the question, all he really had to do was go home and consider what kind of future he could create for himself. I am here. Izuku must have been taken aback to see All Might suddenly materialize in front of him. All Might, what are you doing here? Izuku glanced around, but he saw no one in their immediate vicinity. How did you get rid of all those reporters that surrounded you? All Might simply burst out laughing at the inquiries. Ha 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 ha, I stand for justice, not sound bites. Then he continued, because I am All Maya, while striking a number of muscular poses. It was quite upsetting to watch him revert to his slender form while simultaneously spitting blood. All Might spoke up after controlling his hacking cough and cleaning his mouth of extra blood, but his voice carried a tone that made it obvious that he had used up a lot of energy and needed some time to recover. Young man, I came here to thank you, and also to discuss your question from earlier. That perplexed Izuku. At least he was certain All Might had answered his question. If you hadn't told me about your life, no, if you hadn't run into that fight, I would have been a worthless bystander watching from the crowd, so thanks. Hearing that, Izuku felt compelled to apologize. He claimed that since he essentially interfered with All Might's heroic endeavors, it was his fault in the first place. Izuku claimed that All Might was entirely responsible for wasting his time and effort, which he believed was the reason the slime villain was able to go free and start a riot. I'm not done. After All Might said that, Izuku halted his apology and turned to face his idol. All Might observed that he now had the teenager's full and undivided attention and remarked, You told me you didn't have a power. So when I saw this quirkless boy try to save a life, it inspired me to act too. There are stories about every hero, about how they became great. Most of them have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think, almost on their own. Izuku wasn't sure, but he felt as though his heart was beginning to ache. It was a pain he had never experienced before and would subsequently describe. It was the agony that results when a part of you that has been restrained by weights is eventually released. He had been waiting his entire life to hear his idol speak the words in earnest. And today, that's what happened to you. All Might saw the teenager's body drop to his knees and tears well up in his eyes as a result of his words. He was aware that he was not hurting him in any way. All Might chose to make it clear that the words were indeed spoken to him because he knew he was saying exactly what this teenager had been waiting his entire life to hear. Young man, you too can become a hero. Izuku Midoriya had believed that the type of training he had endured was challenging. It wasn't that he lacked sufficient reading and teaching resources or equipment, but adhering to a rigorous and rather inflexible training schedule required concentration just to get started. Up until 3 weeks ago, he believed that was always the most difficult part. Izuku was unaware of what lay ahead for him or the distinction between being selected for a gift and being prepared to accept it when All Might informed him that he was worthy of inheriting a power, a quirk that he claimed could be passed down from person to person. In order to train his body, All Might had Izuku clean up a sizable portion of the beach at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park for the past 3 weeks. Even though it was challenging, Izuku soon discovered a number of things about what All Might wanted him to do. The main objective was to make use of the time before the UA entrance exam. To improve his physical condition compared to his current state. All Might claimed that although he had anticipated Izuku to be a skinny fanboy, the fact that he was more athletic than the average junior high school student might have worked to his advantage. He described his aim to pass American Dream plan, in order to push Izuku to reach training goals that even the teenager believed were achievable. The secondary objective appeared to be a kind of reminder. All Might aimed to teach the lesson that being a pro-hero wasn't just about apprehending ostentatious villains by cleaning up the beach. He claimed that during their early years as pro-heroes, they occasionally performed community service. Though All Might stated that being a hero also carried the risks of letting the celebrity status go to their heads, most people thought the work was too beneath them. Too many promising pro-heroes, he claimed, had given their all to being just that, but only after a few triumphs or noteworthy achievements did they start to believe they were superior to other pro-heroes. Izuku was aware of that idea, but every time he went to the beach to begin picking up trash, he couldn't help but wonder how some of the things had come to be there in the first place. Izuku was aware that occasionally the ocean current would bring some trash here, but even he was certain that items like oil drums, several shoe lockers, and a delivery van with 2 people inside could not have been washed up by the ocean. It was beginning to seem to the teenager that All Might was sneaking in some extra stuff. Even though this beach has been transformed into an unofficial disposal site, the police would undoubtedly notice some of the things that Izuku moved. There was trash on the beach, such as used food containers and the like, but he was also moving entire appliances. How, really, didn't anyone notice? As a sort of morning ritual, Izuku forced the thought from his mind before beginning his efforts to clean up the beach. However, he soon discovered that All Might was surrounded by some fans, even though the sun hadn't even started to rise yet. Since it was the weekend and All Might typically spent more time with Izuku on the weekends overseeing his training efforts, that wasn't all that surprising. It was almost a given that some passers-by would notice that a particular celebrity had been hanging out in one place more than others, and they would assume that the celebrity would return. As part of his training, Izuku chose not to ask All Might what he wanted to do first on the beach. The adolescent had already determined that it was best to start with items he could carry in one arm. If he did more than that, he knew he would exhaust his stamina too quickly, making the remaining portion of the exercise more difficult than necessary. All right, let's get going. An additional boost of motivation to tackle yet another exhausting training, garbage removal day, Izuku thought to himself. It should come as no surprise to Izuku that the first trash items he removed were a number of tires. They appeared to be roughly the same size as every one he had moved in the previous 3 weeks, and since he could clearly recall how much strength he had used initially, he wanted to assess the overall development of his strength. Izuku's ability to carry 2 tires at once was not an attempt to brag or anything, rather, it was an indication that he had been strengthening, which boosted his confidence because, after 3 weeks, he had a persistent worry that perhaps all of his hard work was not paying off. After all this time, Izuku didn't anticipate having a muscular form like All Might. All he wanted to know was whether this was turning out to be worthwhile, and it was. Izuku was actually beginning to feel a little better about the grueling training after getting another set of tires and carrying them both to the pickup location. Hello, I know you're out there. Can I get a little help? Izuku heard that and was immediately drawn to it. He turned to see who might have been phoning for assistance, but no one was in his immediate vicinity. All Might was still talking to his fans, as Izuku could see. Izuku thought that he would have moved right away to respond to the call for assistance if All Might had heard it. When one of the fans shouted it out to record All Might saying the catchphrase and grinning, the teenager did think that perhaps he had misheard. But as soon as he heard pounding coming from one of the larger appliances, that thought was shattered. It appeared to be a refrigerator, possibly for a restaurant or a large house. In any case, Izuku could see that the door was being struck, and based on the sounds and appearance, it was being struck from the inside. Izuku approached the appliance and said, hello. Someone in there? The voice called back, faint but clear, yes. I'm in here, I'm stuck, as it pounded harder on the door from within. Izuku acted after learning that someone was inside. He initially tried the door's handle, but after exerting more force than it was intended to withstand, it broke off. Then, in an attempt to at least partially open the door, he tried inserting his fingertips, but that also failed. When he noticed some debris off to the side that appeared to be metal pipes, he realized he needed a tool. Izuku was relieved to discover that one of the ends of a metal pipe resembled the tip of a crowbar, even though he had to essentially tear it out of the pile to use it. Izuku shouted, "Hang on. Gonna try something," to reassure the person who was trapped inside. "Please hurry. Been in here too long already." Izuku had to hit the metal pole 3 times before he was able to wedge it precisely, causing a crack in the door seal. Izuku used all of this strength to push down on the metal pipe like a lever. Izuku didn't properly brace his footing to prevent this from happening, so it took a moment, but it was enough to cause the door to fling open loudly and to fall flat on his back. However, he stood up as fast as he could and looked to see if the person inside the appliance needed any additional assistance. There was one thing about the person who came out that really caught our attention. Although Izuku had seen pink-haired people before, he had never seen this particular shade of pink. Additionally, after realizing that the girl was roughly his age, he noticed that her eyes were undoubtedly the most unusual thing he had ever seen. She also wore a pair of goggles on her head that looked complicated but rather strange. When the girl emerged from the refrigerator, she exclaimed, "Phew, thanks. Don't know how much longer I would have lasted in there. Guess it's true about the old saying of playing. Don't play around in junkyards or the junkyard will eat you." Izuku asked, but wasn't sure if the girl was being serious or joking about her past circumstances. In addition, he had never heard that saying before. As she was dusting herself off and making sure her clothes weren't ripped anywhere, the pink-haired girl responded, "Oh, just something my dad told me. Since I tend to go scrounging for parts, he always warned me that I was too carefree and didn't keep an eye on my surroundings. I always thought he was trying to be ironic when he said that, but now I can't say that anymore." Izuku was relieved that the girl in front of him appeared to be safe, but he was also a little perplexed right now. All Might had claimed that the trash had kept people away from this beach for a while and that if anyone had come, it was most likely not because of the trash, at least that was his belief. The girl focused on the person who had saved her after she had finished cleaning herself up and examining herself. In her opinion, nothing stood out about him. Not the light freckles on his face or his disheveled greenish-black hair. However, she hardly ever saw his green-colored eyes. At least as the color of a person's iris. "My name's Mei Hatsume, and who's the name of the one who got me out of that refrigerator trap?" As he said, Midoriya, Izuku Midoriya, he couldn't help but sound a little uneasy. He recalled that this was the first time he had ever spoken to a girl. Mei examined Izuku's body, running her eyes over his features. She could swear that there was something unique about him, but he was also as unremarkable as he appeared. She was receiving contradicting information despite her ability to see several kilometers into the distance due to a quirk. He was examining Izuku in return to Mei's examination. The girl's headgear and eyes were striking, but what really got him thinking was when he noticed what appeared to be a tool belt around her waist. Surely she hadn't come here to fix some of these things, didn't she? Mei turned back to the appliance she had just become trapped in and said, "Well, thanks again for the save. Wouldn't have happened if the fridge didn't slide on me." Since Izuku had never really spoken to a girl before, he was only engaging in conversation out of curiosity. Slide, how did Ida? As she ascended to the top of the tilted-over refrigerator and started to remove the screws holding the motor on top in place, Mei responded, "I was trying to get the motor that this fridge uses to keep things inside cool. One look at it and I knew right away that the motor was in good shape. But how this fridge was built made it so that the motor itself was in and out of the main unit. I undid the parts that were connecting from inside. I must have shifted the weight around too much and made the door slam shut on me." Izuku observed as the teenage girl with the pink hair quickly removed the final bolts and screws holding the motor in place. He saw her put both hands on either side of the motor and start pulling. Her third attempt, in which she stood completely atop the slanted refrigerator, was successful after her first two attempts failed. So much so that Mei stumbled and fell backwards with a startled yelp after the motor was removed from the device. It would have been problematic because there were numerous solid shapes in the trash behind her, some of which also had points. The instant she hit her back, she was certain to hurt herself. By catching her in time, the hero who rescued her from the refrigerator was able to save her once more. When Mei felt herself no longer falling, she was perplexed as to why the pain she had anticipated had not materialized. Even more perplexed that she was still holding the motor while being carried in a bridal fashion. She turned to face the boy who had caught her and saw that he could support both her and the weight of the motor. His general appearance didn't suggest strength, but the fact that he was able to carry her and the motor with little difficulty made that obvious. Izuku asked, "You all right?" before he and the girl left the area on the debris pile and made their way to a secure location on the beach. Izuku placed her down so that her feet touched the ground first after he was certain they were free of any sharp or bothersome objects. Yeah. Mei wasn't entirely taken aback by the events. It seemed as though she had finally discovered what it was about the person in front of her that told her there was more to him than what was immediately apparent. "Gotta say, you are definitely stronger than you look." For his first response, Izuku couldn't help but smile sheepishly and rub the back of his head. That's because because I've been training to get stronger and part of my training has been I'm training at the same time I'm helping to clean up this beach." After hearing that, Mei had a long-standing question answered. "Oh, so you're doing it? I come here from time to time to see if there's any parts worth salvaging, and I've seen some of the debris being moved around or gone. I was wondering who was behind it all. However, as she removed her backpack and placed the salvaged motor inside, May had another question. It was the sort of question she felt compelled to pose. Wait, you're telling me you're the only one doing it? If you said you're helping to clean, why don't I see anyone else helping you now? May looked up and down the beach using her quirk, but she couldn't find anyone else doing anything that could be considered clearing the debris. The fact that one person was doing all of this wasn't entirely irrational. If May had to guess, the person who saved her twice was probably no older than she was, but she did remember seeing some objects that would need at least 2 people to move. May approached Izuku closely and asked, "Do you have like some kind of super strength or matter-changing quirk?" Since Izuku had never been this close to a girl before, he felt a little too personal. Well, you see. That Isa. Uma. Izuku's mind freeze and stuttering were getting the better of him, but they didn't stop the girl in front of him from displaying curiosity in her eyes. With every second that went by, May's curiosity about this person grew due to the thought that crossed her mind. It's unlikely, but it made some sense if he was using a quirk to move this trash around. This could indicate that he was a pro hero, or at the very least, that he had a temporary license that permitted him to perform such tasks using his quirk. Getting some sort of support once she entered UA was one of the steps May needed to take in order to realize her dream of creating all sorts of equipment for pro heroes that she dubbed her super cute babies. After all, she wanted to create everything that came to her mind. Elevated. She intended to attempt the UA support course entrance exam rather than the hero course entrance exam. And passing that entrance exam required not only outstanding grades but also creativity and originality. Similar to the majority of well-known pro heroes in Japan, having UA high as a benchmark for schooling and graduation virtually assured lucrative contracts with any of the nation's support hero agencies. May was certain that all of the technology she had dreamed up over the years would come to pass once she had that on her resume. Since Island was the best location in the world for developing new technologies and breaking new scientific ground, her ultimate objective was to land a job there. Since it seemed like a random chance encounter, May was actually struggling to control her giddiness and running into someone who could help her get closer to her goals. Izuku inhaled deeply to regain his composure, which was difficult enough in and of itself, before he could react appropriately to the girl who was looking directly into his eyes. "I'm not actually using, my quirk for this. This is preparation for getting ready to take the entrance exam to UA. Hi. Wow, really? You're gonna apply to UA too?" Izuku's statement of what he was truly doing did not disappoint May. In a way, it was still an opportunity that could benefit her and, if she handled it correctly, him as well. "I'm applying to UA. Hi too. What course are you getting ready for?" "The hero course." Actually, yeah. I plan to take in less than 10 months. When May heard that, her giddiness practically exploded. When she shouted out her intention to apply to the support course at UA, she recalled hearing from her teacher. That she made anything herself while she was a student at UA was utilized by a pro hero almost assured a variety of options following graduation. And if that were the case, perhaps assisting someone with one of her adorable children who was taking the hero course entrance exam would make them both stand out in a lot of ways. May initially thought that was the logical argument. However, she had such a strong inner drive to create and invent that she never missed an opportunity to express that drive. May was answering questions so quickly that it took Izuku a moment to comprehend the first one. "What is your quirk?" "Super strength, since you're moving all of this heavy stuff around on your own." "Matter manipulation. Some kind of variation of an emitter type, or maybe that really rare warp quirk I've heard about. Like you can look, touch or something and you teleport an object to another location." May was asking 3 questions at a time. Izuku was forced to retreat from the verbal abuse, but May followed him each time. It wasn't until his left foot lost its firm grip on the ground and caused him to lose his balance that Izuku realized how many steps he had taken backward. He fell backwards, instinctively grabbing onto anything to prevent himself from falling, whatever it was that did it. Even though one hand managed to catch something, the fall was still unabated. Fortunately and unfortunately for Izuku, there was nothing there that could have injured him if he had landed on it. The fortunate aspect of the fall was that whatever Izuku stumbled over and fell over must have been buried deep enough in the sand to be invisible, yet far enough away from any of the piles Izuku was moving to avoid detection. The unfortunate thing for Izuku, at least in his opinion, was realizing that the girl's shirt was what his hand had grabbed onto in an attempt to keep himself from falling, and that's where his hand ended up because he had caused her to fall directly on top of him. The girl he made to fall on top of him was still staring at him with the same intense curiosity she had when she asked all those earlier questions, but his ability to process information came to a complete stop when he noticed and felt where his hand was. Mei's mind was utterly oblivious to the fact that Izuku's left hand was on her chest. Is your quirk able to control sand or air? It's gotta be sand like that one pro hero, the sand hero, Snatch. I mean, how else can you move all this stuff on your own? Mei straightened herself so she was essentially sitting on Izuku's lap, but if she had stayed on top of him, his mind might have remained in such a shut-down state. Mei noticed that Izuku had a toned chest of some kind when she placed her hand on his chest to help her stay balanced while sitting. She had no prior indication that he was more muscular because his clothes appeared a bit loose. Though she didn't even know what kind of quirk Izuku possessed, Mei's mind raced through all the possible gear she could make. Okay, your quirk has got to be some kind of super strength or maybe a kind of energy application or transference. I've heard that most quirk require a strong physical body in order to be used properly and fully, and if you're using this as a kind of training method to strengthen your body, then said quirk is being underutilized or is currently underdeveloped aura. However, she did notice that Izuku was simply staring up at her with a blank expression on his face while she was speaking to him. Mei looked up to see what might have caught Izuku's attention, but her eyesight quirk showed her nothing but blue skies and a few clouds, so she looked back down, her face clearly bewildered. She expressed her increasing bewilderment by cocking her head to the side. Mei pondered for a moment before coming up with something she felt was suitable for the circumstance because it didn't always turn on right away and occasionally worked whenever she made something. Mei slapped Izuku across the face with her right hand, happy that the time-tested technique of slapping a piece of equipment just right could be used on people as well. It took Izuku a moment to realize what had happened and what was happening because his mind was rebooting. All of the memories came flooding back to him when he saw the pink-haired girl sitting on top of him, her face wearing a puzzled expression. Including the location of his left hand. Before he scurried out from under her and knelt down in front of her in an apologetic position, Izuku glanced at his left hand and then at Mei multiple times. I am so sorry, please forgive, I didn't meant to touch you there. Izuku was unaware of how his action perplexed Mei even more as he buried his head in the sand. Mei didn't remember anything Izuku had done to merit such an apology, so she said, touch me. Touch me where? You fell down and grabbed my shirt. I don't think my shirt has a mind that says it doesn't like being touched. However, she was unaware of the inadvertent act for which Izuku felt compelled to apologize. Izuku had heard that when someone touched someone else without that person's permission or consent, it usually resulted in that person becoming angry. You're not mad. He had witnessed it previously, when students at Aldera Junior High ended up getting into a fistfight. He believed it was justified, so he wasn't scared of being struck by the girl. Izuku was more terrified that she would pick up something from the debris heaps surrounding them and use it to beat him to death. Mei stood up and said, mad about what? You tripped, you fell, probably hit your head and got knocked out. Her voice carried a note of perplexity. Gotta say, you seem a little strange right now, but hey, chalk it up to smacking the back of your head. Izuku observed Mei return to her backpack containing the salvaged motor and lift it up to slide her arms through the straps. Izuku carefully rose from his spot on the ground, brushing off the extra sand that was sticking to him, but he was still afraid she might hit him for what he had done, accident or not. Mei turned back to Izuku once she was certain that the backpack and everything inside were safe. So, honestly, what is your quirk? Izuku wasn't very good at making things up or lying. It was simply the way his single mother brought him up. However, he was also aware that he could only tell the girl in front of him what he had already told her. All Might had revealed to him the secret of his power, and Izuku was aware that the concept that a quirk could be passed from one person to another would fundamentally alter the lives of people everywhere. However, all of that depended on whether she initially believed him, and Izuku recalled how initially he was unable to understand what he was being told. Izuku felt, to put it mildly, that he was in a very strange situation because of the way the girl was looking at him and waiting for a response. It was strange enough that Izuku just said what was on his mind, following his instinct. My quirk, it involves a shielda. When he gave her that response, Izuku noticed a hint of growing curiosity in Mei's face. He felt the need to explain himself to her, even though what he had told her wasn't exactly a lie. With a stone in his hand, Izuku walked over to the beach's edge and said, "My quirk, it's connected to a shield I have. I can make it, well, I can make it so it can bounce off of almost any solid surface. I don't have it with me right now, but the best visual example is like this." He hurled the stone so that it skipped off the water's surface multiple times before finally making a splash and sinking below. After seeing and hearing what Izuku showed her, Mei had a reflective expression on her face. With all the information she had, it began to make sense to Mei because there were numerous instances of quirks that could accomplish almost anything. "I get it, your quirk is one of those union types," Mei replied. Izuku was intrigued because, in spite of his extensive documented research on quirks over the years, he was embarrassed to acknowledge that he had never heard of quirks being categorized as union types. Mei understood Izuku's implicit query and shared the knowledge she possessed. "It's a relatively new classification for quirks, so I'm not surprised you might not have heard about it. Such quirks usually are connected to the basic elements like fire, metal, air, wood, water, etc., but it's different than people who can create fire, metal, air, wood, water and whatever else exist in nature. So the difference is one can create something and control it while the other can only control it but not create it." Mei looked around to see if there was anything she could use as a visual aid and said, not exactly." Recall that Mei rushed over to a car's hubcap and picked it up when Izuku claimed that his quirk was linked to his shield. Mei held the object in her hand and said, "Say this is your shield." Now, there are some union-type quirks some people have that is like saying this is part of me and no one else can control it but me. If someone had a magnetic quirk or a means to levitate objects, they can't take control of your shield because they are trying to take control of only a part of you. To take control of the shield, they would have to take control of every aspect of you just in order to take the shield. To get the hubcap to fly to another pile, Mei gave it a little frisbee toss. Now, had someone had the means to control metal or certain objects, they wouldn't be so easily able to take control of your shield because another aspect of union quirks is the amount of space that it affects. Izuku analyzed the data and expressed the theory that his mind had developed. "So you're saying some union quirks affect a specific amount of area too? Like say if it was a radius around someone, anywhere between a meter and mile, and if someone who can control an element then their control would be affected inside the radius." "Exactly. Like if someone had a fire creating and or controlling quirk. If that person was inside the area that a union quirk affects then the person who can create or control fire would have their quirk either compromised or inert for a time." Except for one piece of information, Izuku thought he understood what Mei was telling him. "Wait, wouldn't the term be more like area quirk than union quirk? I mean, union usually is a term for joining and what you described doesn't really seem like the term fits properly. Actually that's why separates the two kinds of quirk. Area quirks affect an area but union quirks can also affect a person if the quirk they have is similar to the person who has the union quirk. Like using the person who has a fire quirk for the example. If a person has a union quirk and it's also related to fire then it's more than just possible that the person with just the fire quirk can actually be controlled by the person with the union quirk so long as they are in the affected area." For Izuku, that information made everything clear. The image of a puppet and its strings came to him. Anything that is within the reach of the string can be controlled, much like a puppet, and multiple puppets can be controlled simultaneously. Izuku was aware that the analogy was oversimplified, but it seemed appropriate based on how it was explained. Izuku was quite impressed to hear that from Mei because he believed that his fanboy pastime of gathering information about pro-heroes and their peculiarities covered a lot of ground that most people outside of pro-heroes and government organizations were unaware of. Izuku was curious, though, because he had just heard all of this from a girl who was salvaging parts. She had mentioned applying to UA, he recalled. Hi too, and if she already knew all of this, did it imply that he was missing something that might be necessary to pass the entrance exam? He started to worry that he was missing something important between his physical training and his junior high school coursework. With courtesy, Izuku said, Hatsume, was it? The girl with the pink hair smiled and said, "You can call me Mei." Izuku said, "Okay, Mei. You said you were applying to UA. Hi as well." Mei nodded enthusiastically in response. "Are you applying for the hero course?" Mei laughed a little as she responded, "Me. Ha ha ha, nope, Not a chance, since I know I don't have what it takes to pass something that has a passing rate of less than 1%. Then why apply if not for the hero course? Izuku had long held the belief that UA was the only institution worth attending if one wished to become a pro hero. Nowhere else but High. Mei confidently stated, because UA High doesn't just offer the hero course. As she elaborated on her remarks, she turned to face another heap of rubble to search through. There are many other high schools around the country that offer a hero course. There are several pro heroes that are among the top 10 in the nation that didn't graduate from UA High, but that doesn't mean graduating from UA High is the same as graduating from any other high school in the nation. Mei examined another appliance she had discovered. It appeared to be a tiny computer monitor or television, but whatever it was, it failed Mei's inspection and was carelessly thrown aside. If you think about it, everyone in this world has dreams. Some are the same while most of them are different, and vice versa. Izuku questioned whether Mei was being sincere or if her words were intended to confuse him. Mei approached Izuku after shifting her focus from the damaged appliance parts she was searching through. You said you're going to UA to take their hero course, right? Izuku nodded while attempting to maintain his cool because he was uneasy about Mei's proximity to him once more. Mei didn't wait for Izuku to respond. Well, what do all heroes have or rather need? And don't just say quirks. They need support. Izuku's mind considered all the instances of pro heroes in need of assistance and realized how little knowledge he possessed. He reasoned that the type of support Mei was referring to might be the sidekicks that pro heroes had, which was not unusual at all. That would be considered support, wouldn't it? Izuku had heard of some pro hero agencies employing over a dozen sidekicks. However, the more he considered Mei's statement that heroes require assistance, the more he understood that she was referring to something else. Izuku did ask Mei what kind of support she was referring to in order to get clarification. Mei reached into one of her pockets and took out a black circular object. She then showed what it could do by somehow splitting it in half and throwing one piece at a random appliance and another at another object. The two random objects started flying at each other as soon as she did that, and they collided midway. It would be an understatement to say that Izuku was pleasantly surprised. Despite being barely larger than her hand, Mei's device accomplished an almost impossible feat. Mei had already approached the spot where the two objects had collided and was able to get the object she had used to send them flying at one another. This little super cute baby of mine is a prototype for a capture device I'm working on. It creates a strong magnetic effect between the two parts that attracts to each other. As you saw, it's so strong that it can actually carry rather significant weight loads in almost an instant. Mei examined the device to make sure there was a problem with it and wasn't shocked to see it. Unfortunately, the charge that's needed to create such a strong magnetic attraction so strong that the battery life for it wears out in less than 30 seconds. Izuku gazed in wonder at the gadget in Mei's hand and said, but still for something that small, being able to lift two things that are clearly heavy metal objects in an instant. Impressive cute little baby, isn't it? It's something I made last month, but I'll eventually figure out how to make a strong enough miniature power source for it so it lasts far longer than 30 seconds. Izuku was still looking at the device when Mei handed it to him. Pro heroes are trained to be at their very best, but more often than not they come across something that isn't something they expect, even if they are taught to expect the unexpected. As not all pro heroes are the same, not all villains are the same as well. What can take down one type of villain may not work on another type. Plus, not all villains just use their quirks to commit crimes. To give the pro heroes the chance to counter anything a villain might throw at them, sometimes they need to use a support item. Mei reclaimed the gadget from Izuku and threw it into the air as if she were tossing a coin. This cute little baby of mine will be able to do all sorts of things once I make it even cuter. Just think, if a villain has a gun or can make or use metal weapons, one of these will rip them out of their hands and give the pro hero the chance to one-shot them with ease. When Izuku realized what Mei had said to him earlier, he stopped, nodding his head in agreement. Wait a minute, you made this a month ago. How? How you found me? Looking for some spare and usable parts from places like this. Izuku cast a quick glance around, as if for the first time he was truly seeing something that was so clear to others. You mean to say that whatever you find in garbage piles like this that are usable, you can use it to make stuff like that thing in your hand? Izuku only received a smile from Mei, but it was a powerful statement in and of itself. When Izuku's mind began to connect the dots, he finally experienced what might be regarded as the penultimate realization regarding Mei Hatsume. Even he was aware that, with the right engineering and mechanics knowledge, some of the trashed items he had seen and moved over the past few weeks could be sufficiently restored to work as they did previously and, if feasible, repurposed for another purpose. Even though he wasn't sure how, Izuku knew that if a refrigerator motor was fixed and used in the same way, it could be used to keep things cool. Given solid materials and equipment, what could Mei create if she could create something similar to that magnet using spare parts that people discard? Mei continued to smile as she looked around to see if there was anything else she could use, salvage, and repair. Once I get into UA, I'll be able to go even further in designing and creating super cute babies like these. Intel Thena. Izuku didn't know how, but he could tell that if she continued to have that mindset, this girl would succeed. It reminded him somewhat of the time before he met All Might and was selected to be his heir, overcoming obstacles that most people don't even consider while working toward a goal. Izuku was about to return to his beach cleaning and training when he turned to face the two objects that Mei had previously used in the magnet device. He was struck with an idea when he recalled how quickly the two objects flew at one another when the magnetic effect was applied. The adolescent boy practically ran up to the adolescent girl and asked her for more details about the magnetic device she was demonstrating. He wanted to know if it could hold a single charge or if it could be modified to hold multiple charges. As soon as those questions were posed, Mei remembered why she had been questioning Izuku about her peculiarity. Additionally, she was unaware that, despite the fact that the magnetic device wasn't working as she had hoped, she would almost dismiss it as a completed project and proceed to the next one she had mentally prepared. Izuku was about to slap himself in the face when he realized that he had failed to see what might be a serious drawback to having a shield. So can it be done? He asked. The first thing that came to mind was how to change the device to fulfill Izuku's request. Make it so this magnet can call your shield to you if you can't reach. No sweat. Already, she initially had an idea for a belt buckle that Izuku could press to summon his shield, but she decided against it. Then she pictured a full body suit or helmet of some sort. She had the ideal idea, though, when she glanced down at the gadget in her hand and then at Izuku's hands. Izuku was ecstatic to have met someone like Mei, and even though they had only recently met, she was more than happy to assist him with anything. When Mei took his left hand and felt all around up to his elbow, he became extremely anxious. He then did the same with his right hand and elbow. What are you doing? Mei responded, mentally noting how Izuku's hands and arms felt to her. Well, a shield is usually carried on the back or the arms of the person who's using it. She was already thinking about creating magnetic forearm guards or magnetic gauntlets for both hands. Since you said your quirk can allow you to throw your shield, best to make it so my soon-to-be-made super cute little baby can fit on your arms. That way if you throw your shield and if it goes off course or you need to call it back to you quicker than you can reach for it, all you'll have to do is stick out your hand to call the shield to you. Mei looked at each of Izuku's hands, and Izuku tried not to let his face burn. He wasn't sure if she was making fun of him or if she really found his hands interesting. However, he noticed that because she was wearing what appeared to be fingerless gloves, her hands or at least her fingers seemed softer than his. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief when Mei completed whatever it was she was doing with his hands. Only to instantly freeze when he sensed Mei's hands touching his entire back and shoulder region. Mei was mentally noting everything she would need to create a harness of some sort that Izuku would wear to fasten his shield to his back. Before she could fully commit to the plans she had made up her mind in a flash, she needed one more piece of information. This shield of yours, what kind of metal and shape is it? He only relaxed, albeit slightly, to respond to Mei when he felt her hands leave his back. It's a circular shape that's about 2.5 foot wide and weighs about 12 pounds. In a sort of thinking pose, Mei put a finger under her chin and said, mostly to herself, Okay, I got the perfect super cute baby in mind for what you need. Mei's voice was full of excitement, which Izuku could easily sense. He wanted to ask one more useful question before she began, but it was kind of contagious. Before you start, Mei, what do you want in return? I mean, I'll gladly pay you if you want. Mei considered what Izuku had said and what she had asked for in exchange for her services. The thought of getting paid didn't bother her, but she chose not to. Mei made the decision to enter into a sort of quid pro quo arrangement with Izuku. Tell you what, in exchange for helping you to make your own personal super cute little baby, you can help me by testing out some of the super cute babies I've already made. Mei offered him a deal, but Izuku wasn't sure if it was as risky as it appeared. When she made the offer and smiled at him, it seemed as though Mei was barely controlling her excitement, and he felt a shiver go up his spine. Everything about the deal seemed fair, except for the chilling sensation in the back of the neck. Izuku held out his right hand and said, "Deal." Mei accepted it with both hands and gave his right hand a firm shake. Awesome. Mei was truly delighted that Izuku agreed to the terms. Now I must be off. I got all these ideas in my head and not a lot of time to turn them into reality. Just before taking off, Mei paused to make sure Izuku would be back at this beach the following week. The teen with the pink hair claimed that she could quickly create what Izuku had requested, but she also wanted to bring some of the technology so she could test it out with her. Izuku informed her that he would continue returning to the beach until he had completed cleaning up as directed for the foreseeable future. Great. Mei waved goodbye and said, "See you next week, Zuzu." The teenage boy exclaimed, It's Izuku. Izuku Midoriya." "That's what I said, Zuzu," the girl retorted, continuing to sprint in the direction of her goal. Mei was already off the beach and out of his line of sight before Izuku could call out again to try to correct her. The way the whole thing with Mei Hatsume ended made him scratch the back of his head. He was aware that it was strange of him to ask someone he hardly knew for assistance with something so unexpected. However, he acknowledged that he was engrossed in the moment when he noticed that this girl was accomplishing more with significantly less than most people. Respect should be shown for that. "Cute girl, your girlfriend." He was startled out of his reverie by the sound of that coming from behind, primarily because he could hear the forespoken words, disappointed tone. He was undoubtedly uneasy on many levels when he turned around and saw All Might in his non-muscular form, his arms crossed and his eyes narrowed at him. When All Might saw how anxious Izuku was getting, he sighed wearily. According to him, the adolescent boy appeared to be just a step away from actually perspiring profusely. He also understood that he couldn't be too upset with Izuku because handling the fans who arrived at the beach took longer than anticipated. All Might realized that he would need to reconsider how he would continue to train Izuku without his position as the most well-liked pro-hero getting in the way. Additionally, after hearing the two teenagers' main points of discussion, he thought it might be time to share some lessons he had learned from his own experience. "Relax, kid. I overheard a lot of what the two of you said and I gotta say, what she said isn't far from the truth." Izuku asked his favorite hero of all time, which part? All Might walked over to Izuku and said, "About pro-heroes needing support and support items. It's not an uncommon practice for any pro-hero to have support items. Some use them sparingly and some use a common one like a kind of handcuffs or even a first aid kit. But there's another side that most don't think about until it's too late." "Another side? What other side is there?" Recalling some incidents that exemplified his career as a pro-hero, All Might stated, "For starters, any hero reinforcing their power with new gear can be a smart move. Just make sure you don't rely on it too much. Some people aren't able to hold their own after losing an item. I've seen way too many heroes fall into that trap and what the cost is as a result." While he overheard the two talking, All Might had a question that came to him. He didn't want to give Izuku the incorrect impression that he should never use a support item. "Now what's this about a shield?" Izuku realized that he had never mentioned the shield or anything even vaguely associated with it to the man since that day, until All Might asked that question. Izuku publicly apologized and assured the man that he wasn't hiding anything from him after feeling as though he had lied to All Might as a result of being asked. All Might believed the boy after noticing the expression in Izuku's eyes. Thus, when Izuku explained the specifics of the shield's operation to All Might, his interest in it significantly grew. What he discovered over the years, where he thought it originated, and how old the boy was when he discovered it. Izuku's explanation of the shield was absorbed by One for All's current heir, who analyzed it in his mind. All Might had seen a lot during his previous global travels to hone his mastery of One for All, but nothing from his prior experiences seemed to provide the solution he felt best suited the puzzle he was given. He believed there was a puzzle worth solving, but he wasn't sure how to start. He had no doubts about Izuku's ability to use the shield, but perhaps the pink-haired girl was hinting at something when she described Union-type quirks to Izuku. It was possible that Izuku was misdiagnosed and wasn't actually quirkless. If so, it might have been best to find out for sure whether Izuku Midoriya had a quirk. After giving the beach a thorough inspection, All Might saw that Izuku was actually ahead of schedule for the teenager. All Might could afford to do what it had planned one day. All Might held up a hand to deflect the inevitable barrage of questions Izuku was about to throw at him after saying, "Izuku, tomorrow we're going to take the day off from training. Your progress has been exceptional after these recent weeks, and judging by the state of the beach, you're ahead of schedule enough to where we can take at least one day off, but we'll be redoubling the efforts afterwards to make up for what is still going to be lost time, understood?" "Yes, sir," said Izuku. He tried to convey in his voice how determined he was to adhere to the training All Might had set up for him. It was evident to All Might that Izuku was still motivated to achieve the objective the man had set for him. If anything, it served as more evidence that All Might made the right decision and that Izuku was a deserving successor. All Might had been presented with and given consideration to other candidates. If he hadn't met Izuku that day, he might have even selected one of them. The process of selecting a successor was not what All Might had anticipated, but at least he was expected to know the solution to every puzzle that was presented to them, no matter how big or small. And at the moment, All Might's intuition told him that the shield Izuku mentioned was anything but trivial. All Might raised his hand once more to silence the question he knew Izuku already had in his head before saying, "Tomorrow, meet back here around 5 a.m. We're going to go meet a friend of mine and she'll tell us exactly what that shield is. I'll tell you all about her tomorrow since it will be something of a long drive just to reach her." Izuku gave a nod in agreement and then put all of his questions on hold for later. Before assuming his muscular form, All Might uttered the words, "Now, it's time to get back to work." Izuku retorted, "Yes, sir," and dashed back to the debris pile where he had begun his work prior to saving Mei Hatsume. It was a clear indication of Izuku's determination to get the trash off the beach that he did everything in his power. All Might was not yet prepared to express his pride in the boy. It had only been a month since he began, and he knew that one for all would not happen anytime soon because he was still training the body to be a suitable vessel for the power. In addition, All Might was certain that Izuku would remember these months as the easiest of his life, regardless of how terrible they were for him. Only the best were accepted by High, and even those who bragged about being the best broke under the hero course's pressure. For those that remained intact, they improved. Whether Izuku Midoriya was aware of it or not, All Might was putting those kinds of expectations on him. Izuku and All Might met at the beach's entrance the next morning, but as was mentioned yesterday, they got into All Might's car and started driving to the acquaintance he had told Izuku about. According to All Might, they would be meeting Valhalla, a retired pro-hero. She had a quirk called Soul Sense that allowed her to sense people's life energies to such an extent that she could connect with them if she had an item they owned at any time in their lives. Because she could locate people nearly half a world away, she excelled at search and rescue operations. The way All Might described the individual's peculiarity and a few of the missions in which he actively participated under her leadership impressed Izuku. Izuku did inquire as to what caused the highly successful pro-hero to retire. All Might clarified that although Valhalla's quirk enabled her to sense people's life energies, she would simultaneously feel the person's life energies as best as All Might could be told. The drawback of having such a power was the extreme mental and emotional strain that would result when Valhalla sensed the person's death before they were saved. Feeling the lingering energy of a deceased person, whether they had died years ago or very recently, was one thing. Feeling it fade, whether slowly or quickly, was a different story. Izuku actually felt bad about asking such a question, but All Might reassured him that having a strong will is necessary to be a pro-hero, and that sometimes a person's will can only withstand so much before breaking. He added that although Valhalla was not a current pro-hero, she had accepted a teaching post at another high school to assist in instructing others in the hero course's forest rescue methods and strategies. Nevertheless, hearing that one passage about the hero's will brought back memories of the time All Might informed Izuku that, despite his constant display of bravery, his smile ultimately served as a mask to conceal the fear he actually experienced. Izuku knew there would be obstacles that he would never anticipate, so his aspirations of becoming a pro-hero were not entirely idealized. Still, it served as a sobering reminder. The two arrived at their destination, which was in a rural area, after roughly 3 hours of driving. Although they weren't exactly in the middle of nowhere, they were unquestionably outside the boundaries of the closest city. They had paused in front of a gate that appeared to enclose a sizable estate. Someone could buzz the people inside to let them know they had guests thanks to an intercom system near the gate. However, a woman's voice came over the intercom before All Might could even get to the button. "Didn't expect you visit me today, All Might." "Well, what can I say except I am here. And I brought along someone else for a visit as well. All Might, in his muscular form, retorted. He heard someone on the other end of the intercom laughing. Well, I at least thank you for not dropping by like the last time. Took a while to fill in that impact crater you made. Hey, sorry. All Might gestured apologetic at the camera at the same time he spoke because the intercom was equipped with a camera system. You're forgiving a dog but only for that time. I still haven't forgiven you for the other 5 times. All Might's only reaction was a sheepish smile and a tense glance at the camera, primarily because he was unable to recall the other occasions Valhalla had mentioned. All Might and Izuku heard a loud buzz, and saw the gate roll open in front of them before they could see what other times Valhalla might be referring to. Izuku was in awe of everything as he walked up the driveway to the main house. Although he had seen a few homes with spacious front yards or backyards, he had never seen a single residence that seemed to occupy an entire city block or more. Wow, is she rich? I mean, how can she afford all of this? All Might claimed that Valhalla had actually traveled overseas for a while, just like he had, after returning to his normal form because his muscular form was a bit too large for his vehicle and he had forgotten to adjust his seat during the transformation. Although All Might was unsure of the exact moment, Valhalla founded a company in the agricultural sector that created methods for raising the likelihood of abundant harvests. She informed him that because she had a keen understanding of the nature of life energies, she had contributed to the development of better farming methods that allowed farms to thrive even in the face of unfavorable weather or seasonal conditions. Additionally, these practices aid in the restoration of forest areas that have been harmed by natural disasters like forest fires or by criminals who feel compelled to destroy everything in their path. Izuku questioned Valhalla about his secreta, his 2 distinct forms, when the car arrived at the front of the main house. It essentially went without saying because All Might had to remind Izuku that she was aware of their arrival before he could sound the intercom buzzer. A housekeeper welcomed the 2 and told them that Valhalla was in her private garden on the east side of the property. Since he was aware of the precise location of the garden on the east side of the property, All Might took the lead. Izuku trailed behind, keeping the shield hidden from view by covering it with a large piece of cloth. All Might made the decision to give Izuku some additional advice as they were strolling together. He primarily urged Izuku to refrain from discussing her past hero career until she did so herself. Izuku asked inquisitively why All Might claimed that Valhalla was the type of hero who disliked the notoriety that accompanied her actions. She was the type of person who preferred to pursue her own interests rather than be exalted and given accolades for a few notable achievements. All Might went so far as to say that she was the reason he wanted Izuku to do beach cleanup as part of his training. After hearing that, Izuku nearly burst out laughing, since it was so clear that, even though All Might inspired people in the modern era, there must have been others who inspired him in the same way back when he first started out. The majority of the laughter would have been directed at himself. Izuku saw that the garden was divided into a greenhouse on one side and a sort of outdoor garden on the other. He saw what appeared to be a variety of plants and vegetables in the garden's outdoor area, which was undoubtedly a pleasant sight. Even though he was certain that some of the vegetables and plants weren't native to Japan, they still appeared to be flourishing. It made sense to Izuku that this woman would be wealthy if this is what the practices All Might had told him about were capable of. Ah, so what brings the symbol of peace and justice to my home for a surprise visit? Izuku turned to see a slim-looking woman approaching them as she was leaving the greenhouse. She wore a light green blouse and skirt, and her dark, raven hair, which reached her waist, was pulled back in a ponytail. When Izuku first saw the woman, he thought she was a fair beauty, but that changed when he saw her eyes, which were completely white when she removed her black sunglasses. The adolescent boy made a mental note that he had previously met a girl with unusual irises, and now he was meeting a woman without them. He tried his hardest not to stare, but it was strange because his mother had always taught him that it was polite to look someone in the eye when speaking to them, and here he was, unable to do so. I apologize for the surprise, but if it makes you feel any better, I was actually going to call you to talk to you about something else. I wanted to get some tips from you about something, replied All Might. Maybe, depending on what you wanted to talk to me about. Both now and in the future. The woman seemed a little surprised when All Might leaned in and whispered something in her ear. Izuku could not clearly hear what was being said to her because it was so faint. Valhalla, looking at Izuku and remarked, I see. Well, we'll talk about that later. What is it that brings you here along with this strange one? Izuku was anxious even though the stare wasn't frightening. All Might was about to explain why when he realized he had omitted a fundamental etiquette step. My apologies. The strange one here is Izuku Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya, this is Valhalla. The woman offered Izuku her hand and said, "Please, call me Valyria." Izuku took care to speak politely to the owner of the house, saying, "It is a pleasure to meet you and allow us entry into your home." To further highlight his sincere regard for her, he even added a bow. Valyria smirked at her friend and remarked, "Quite the charmer and gentleman, isn't he, Toshinori? He seems to be many things. Apparently not only is he seemed to be my #1 fan, but he's found something that, well to put it simply, doesn't make a lot of sense." All Might stated. Valyria said, "Oh, and what might that be?" But she already suspected it because it was too obvious to ignore, even when covered with a white cloth. All Might took a quick look around the room. He transformed into his muscular form and faced Izuku, saying, "Perhaps it'd be best to discuss this after a demonstration of sorts. May I?" Before they left to go to Valhalla's house, Izuku had explained what the shield could do and performed a brief demonstration of its capabilities. All Might needed a few performances to completely comprehend what he was witnessing. All Might found it difficult to believe what he saw the shield could do, even in a society that frequently operates under the premise that seeing is believing. He was already certain that Valyria, who had also witnessed the shield in action, would comprehend his request more clearly. The teenager unwrapped the item, and Valyria saw the color scheme immediately before figuring out what it was. She believed that All Might was the inspiration for the coloring and design because his current uniform undoubtedly had comparable elements. All Might, holding the shield, stepped back from the two and surveyed all the trees in the area. Once he had decided, he instructed Valyria to maintain her gaze on the shield. Izuku turned to face Valhalla again and could see that she was only paying attention to the shield. They both watched as All Might braced himself for the amount of force he would use to throw the shield. He invested at least 10% of what he believed would be a proper show. All Might had a suspicion that if he threw everything he had, he might, to put it mildly, bring down a number of trees in the shield's path. Izuku and Valhalla saw the shield fly fairly quickly at one tree before bouncing off of it after he threw it. Izuku was the only one who knew what would happen next because he caught a glimpse of Valhalla's expression shift from one of simple observation to one of surprise and bewilderment. All Might even anticipated Valyria's astonishment because it appeared to reflect his own when he witnessed the shield in action. No matter how many trees the shield bounced off, it never lost momentum as all three sets of eyes watched it bounce off the side of one, fly to another, and bounce off of it. Because of the way the shield bounced off each tree, All Might assumed Valyria was thinking the same thing he was, that it was actually made of rubber even though it appeared to be made of metal. All three of them attempted to catch the shield after it made a somewhat asymmetrical circle around them, but doing so required a slight leap into the air. All Might approached Valyria and offered her the shield after he had returned to the ground and transformed into his true form. As Valyria gazed at the shield with wide eyes and a surprised mouth, All Might remarked, "I'm guessing you might want to take a closer look at this somewhere a little more private." Despite hearing what was said, she simply nodded. She continued to examine the shield in her hands as she walked back towards the house, followed by All Might and Izuku. The question Valyria couldn't seem to answer on her own was practically shouted out once she was inside. What is this? Your guess is as good as mine, but I believe you have the better means of answering that question than I do." The mighty replied. Valyria walked to a room in the house where she studies and meditates without saying anything. Valyria walked to a table off to the side of the room itself and, once all three were inside, instructed All Might to shut the door behind them. Once on the table, she started using her quirk to see if she could sense anything from it that could help her answer some of the hundreds of questions she was currently asking herself. Izuku assumed that Valhalla was using her quirk when he saw that her eyes started to glow. He whispered to All Might what the woman was doing because his curiosity had overtaken him. As I said, her quirk allows her to sense people's life energies even on an object. You could say it's like she can see the fingerprints left behind by a person and some of the history of the person who possessed the object. The longer it was in their possession, the more history she can see. All Might whispered back in order to maintain Valyria's focus. Izuku nodded as he made as many mental notes as he could about what he was seeing. Valyria was experiencing the most bizarre sensations she had ever encountered as a result of her focus on the object in front of her. Her ability to detect life energy traces on the shield was undoubtedly a quirk. Specifically, There was a very distinct life energy that had been with the shield for almost its entire existence, if her senses were correct. She could think of nothing else that made sense. She was completely unprepared for the other sensations she was receiving from the shield. Valyria's field of vision shifted whenever she used her quirk, as happens when someone sees through various electromagnetic spectrum elements. Similar to how someone may have one perspective on the world and then use infrared or ultraviolet lenses to see it differently. This was how she perceived the shield in front of her. The shield's general shape represented the life force of a person who exuded a strong sense of duty, justice, and the courage and will to face overwhelming odds. It brought to mind All Might in his formative years before he became the symbol of justice and peace, but she was well aware that the previous owner of this shield was neither All Might nor any other pro-hero she had ever heard of. She was perplexed by what she felt and saw next. With the exception of the color scheme, the shield appeared to be a single, solid shape from the outside. However, it appeared to Valyria that the shield was overlapping on top of one another in 3 different ways. Valyria thought the shield was artificial in one way, almost unnatural. Valyria didn't understand the other 2 approaches because they were simultaneously similar and different. She believed that both of them were as old as the world itself, but they also believed that they were no more a part of it than the other 2. That this shield was composed of 3 different types of metals, and if she was correct, neither of them existed anywhere in the world, was the only explanation that made sense to her at the time. However, that couldn't be true in her mind because she could tell by the feel of the shield that it wasn't even a century old, even though 2 of the metals were obviously old. She nearly missed something because of the serious mental confusion. She regrets spending so much time trying to understand it because the instant her quirk touched it, a blinding flash struck her, sending her practically flying backwards. Fortunately for Valhalla, All Might caught her in his muscular form in time. All Might asked, "Are you all right?" Valyria responded with a rather lightheaded nod. "What just happened? Never see something like that happen before when you used your quirk." While standing up, Valhalla remarked, "Actually, it did happen once before. Around the time my quirk first manifested and I didn't have a lot of proper training in how to handle it, I learned that if an object has it within them that I can actually see a moment of either the object's history to a person or the person's moment where the object had the most significance in their lives. A hidden memory if you will between the person and the object." Valyria returned to the table where the shield had been lying. "It's very rare for it to happen and I can count on one hand how many times I've experienced it. This shield now makes it at least 8 times I've come across a hidden memory within an object." Valhalla turned back to All Might and looked at him and Izuku calmly before asking them directly where they found the shield. Izuku shared all of his personal knowledge about the shield with All Might, stating that he had actually seen it for the first time today. There was no doubt that both of them were being honest with her, but she was annoyed that neither of their responses addressed even one of the questions the shield posed. Before telling the 2 what she had discovered, Valhalla paused to gather her thoughts and all the information she currently had. "When I saw this shield bounce off trees in a manner that seemed to defy the laws of physics, I made the assumption that someone's quirk affected it. Maybe somehow you did, young Midoriya. But now I can say that at least what this shield can do is not something you did or you, Toshinori. In fact, no one on this planet has done anything to this shield." Izuku once thought that the shield might have originated in deep space, but he eventually gave up on the theory because it made more sense to think that someone's technical prowess or even a quirk might have produced the shield. For All Might, it at least proved that the shield was devoid of any quirk, which implied that Izuku was also quirk-free. All Might thought to himself, "Well, one answer was found, but now there are 100 more questions from just that one answer alone." When All Might returned to his true form, he asked Valyria to clarify her statement that no one on this planet was involved with the shield. "I'm no expert in metallurgy or physics or even kept up with any new materials that are created, but I know without a doubt that what was used in the creation of this shield, the 3 distinct elements that combined within, neither of them exist, or at least there are 2 that shouldn't exist." Izuku always thought it was odd when someone said that something shouldn't exist but does because, to put it simply, if it doesn't exist, it can't exist. What does that mean, exactly? It made more sense to tell stories rather than make real-world comments. Still finding it hard to believe how light the shield was, Valyria picked it up from the table and approached the 2. "Without question, whatever makes up this shield, 2 of the 3 elements feel very ancient to me. I think the best example to describe it is that they feel far older than anything recorded in history. I don't know if they are older than the dinosaur bones on display in some of the museums around the world, but they are very, very old. With a new perspective on the shield due to the information, All Might remarked, "You said 2 elements. What's the third one?" "The only thing I can tell you is that like the other 2, it is not something that was made on Earth. Even if it was, then it was made in the strictest of secrets. It's like there are 3 secrets in this object, each individual secret is kept secret by the other 2 in such a way that they don't even know what the other secrets are. And to top it all off, I get the sense that this shield was made less than a century ago. The person who held this shield the longest held it at least 40 years to as long as 60 years. All Might said, mainly to himself, a riddle wrapped up in a puzzle that's covered by an enigma. Izuku and All Might both gazed at the shield, attempting to make sense of the questions that Valhalla's examination of it now presented to them. And all of that doesn't answer the question of the hidden memory I saw within. Izuku and All Might both became aware that they had truly missed that fact when they heard Valhalla say that. Valhalla considered her next course of action. What she was regarded as doing was even less common for her than the other occasions she had seen memories concealed within an object. However, she was aware that she couldn't adequately describe what she saw to the 2. She undoubtedly missed a lot because she had a flashback when she first saw the hidden memory. They might therefore be able to see something that could provide them with more answers if they have 2 additional sets of eyes. Valhalla raised the shield so that it was in the center of the 3 of them and remarked, "What I'm about to do is tricky and I can't do it for very long. Maybe a minute at best. Hold on to the shield with both hands and clear your minds of all stray thoughts. Do not think of anything else except the shield in your hands." All Might and Izuku did as they were told. Valhalla used her quirk to find the hidden memory she had previously seen when she was certain they were ready. All Might and Izuku watched as the world around them turned white and then transformed into a scene from an old war film as Valhalla's eyes began to glow again, indicating that she was using their quirk. The sounds of explosions and rifle fire took Izuku by complete surprise. Even All Might was taken aback when he attempted to change into his muscular form out of instinct and discovered that he was unable to. Izuku looked around to see exactly where he was and where he could run to avoid being hit. "What's going on here? Did we get sent to an active battlefield?" he exclaimed. They were obviously on a beach, with the ocean to one side and a precipitous-looking cliffside with gun placements strewn across its top on the other. Between them were soldiers attempting to get as close as possible without being shot at or struck by explosions as they ran from boats that were landing on the shore. Valhalla looked around at the scene and said, "Calm yourself. This is only a memory." Since she was right in the middle of so many lives ending in an instant, she was actually relieved that the scene was only a memory because it would have been too much for her to handle in real life. Hearing that, All Might sigh with relief. He initially believed that he had somehow lost his abilities, but he had to remind himself that he was in a memory that wasn't his own, so he mentally slapped himself upside the head. At that point, he focused on the scene unfolding around him. Something about the soldiers storming the beach caught his attention right away. The best All Might could say was that the equipment they were carrying appeared to be outdated. All Might asked, looking for anything that might also provide a reference to the precise time this memory occurred, "Valyria, can you tell exactly when all of this was taking place? It feels like what we're seeing as far back into the past." Valyria concentrated on gathering as much information as she could. The general feel of this memory is saying it happened in the month of June in the era. Following a brief period of focus, a number felt familiar to the memory. In the year 1944. Valhalla's words were heard by Izuku, but it was All Might who responded to the information. "That can't be right. You said that the person who the shield the longest held it for at least 40 to 60 years. Did anyone else hold it?" "No." Valhalla had to scream out because an explosion nearby produced a loud noise that made her shout over. "The only constant energy I feel coming from the shield is from one person. There are hints of others, but the amount of time for all of them combined doesn't even amount to a decade." All Might wanted to know if Valhalla had miscalculated the year, but the more he observed the recollection, the more he thought it was true. At that moment, he became aware of something and returned his focus to Izuku. The adolescent had not yet witnessed the worst that life could bring or what one can anticipate when one becomes a pro-hero. At this point, the adolescent was witnessing a horrific memory of combat deaths. Izuku was undoubtedly taken aback by what he saw. He was seeing different things now than when he saw people acting as though they were being shot and killed. He even witnessed one explosion on the beach, where it was evident that someone had been flung into the air. When he saw the person who had been flung into the air disintegrate and crash back to the ground in a red haze, it was a sight that made him sick to his stomach. He averted his gaze from the scene and covered his mouth to prevent himself from regurgitating when he saw something he recognized right away. "Look!" exclaimed Izuku, causing Valhalla and All Might to turn in the direction he indicated. There, they observed a man in a red, blue, and white uniform, holding a shield in his hands like a flag, leading a group of men off one of the landing boats. Running in front of the men he was leading, the man shouted, "Let's go. Time to kick these Nazi sons of bitches all the way back to Germany," while holding up his shield to block any bullets that were aimed at him. In order to highlight the fact that they were still in a memory, the three of them watched as he ran straight through them. The man with the shield was wearing a sort of helmet with the English letter A on it, and when he ran past them, all three of them saw that his uniform did resemble All Might's current uniform, with a white star on the chest and back of the upper part. The memory then began to wane, indicating that the allotted minute for Valhalla's quirk had passed. Only Valyria showed no symptoms of being struck by the strong wave of vertigo that Izuku and All Might displayed when they realized they were no longer in the memory and were back in the present. "Sorry about that, I forgot that it's something of a side effect for taking people with me in seeing a hidden memory. I'm used to it, but first-timers, well, it wasn't exactly a pleasant sight to see two people running for waste baskets and then emptying their stomach contents into them, so Valyria was glad she had a couple in this room. Seeing All Might do so with red coloring was more upsetting than seeing the teenager. Valyria approached the room's windows and fully opened them to help reduce the intensity of the stench that would soon fill the space. Izuku and All Might returned their focus to what they had discovered from the hidden memory they had witnessed after they had both recovered from their vertigo and had taken some water to help with the aftereffects. All Might sat down on a chair to help control any further episodes of queasiness, much like Izuku was doing, and said, "Let's recap what we know. We know that S.H.I.E.L.D. is made up of at least 3 elements that are completely unknown at least to the 3 of us. It belonged to someone that wore a kind of pro-hero uniform during either a major conflict or wartime, and the memory we all saw took place in the year 1944. Izuku and Valyria both nodded to indicate that they agreed with every point made by Might. After noticing that they agreed, he went on to ask some personal questions, which were largely addressed. "Izuku, when you told me what the shield could do, I made the assumption that maybe you did indeed have a quirk and it was tied to the shield. That you were somehow misdiagnosed. Clearly, that assumption was wrong." Izuku acknowledged that there was a tiny part of him that hoped he did have a quirk, so he nodded in agreement. At this point, he was positive that he did not. At least he had the truth, even though it didn't hurt as much as the day the doctor told him he didn't have a quirk. All Might forgot that he had not shared that information with Valhalla. Valhalla, for her part, merely shot the teenager a questioning look before turning back to Toshinori. "I was also under the assumption that someone's quirk was affecting the shield, but now more than ever I know that was wrong." All Might went on, adopting a reflective expression, "And if we are to take everything we now know about the shield as the absolute truth, then there are a lot of things that don't make sense." Valhalla said, "Agreed. If memory serves me correctly, in the year 1944 was essentially the start of World War II. And if the shield is truly less than 100 years old." All Might concluded Valhalla's thought by saying, "It contradicts the fact that World War II happened several hundred years ago." The room fell silent as the 3 people took in and processed the information they had been given. Izuku had a question, and he was the first to ask it. "Is it possible that the hidden memory we saw might have been a dream of some kind?" Valyria had a similar idea in her head but threw it away, so she started to explain, "Memories and dreams are different. Dreams more often than not don't involve all 5 senses that a person has. It's exceptionally rare they do, but the odds are the same as if finding out how many people in a city share the same birth year, month, and day. Since memories do involve all 5 senses, which means they leave a stronger impression that can affect both the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. I'm not totally discounting the idea that what we saw was a dream, but until anything else appears that says otherwise, what we saw was a memory." The fact that what they saw appeared to be more of a memory than a dream was somewhat consoling to Izuku. Even as a teenager, he was aware that if someone dreamed about a battlefield where people were dying, it was either a nightmare or they weren't seeing it in their mind. "Valyria, did you get a solid impression of the person who was the sole owner of the shield?" asked All Might. "I did. Strangely enough, it was the same kind of impression I get from you when we first met. Or should I say the impression you created when you first appeared on the scene all those years ago. Like he was also a symbol of peace and justice of his time. All Might's concerns about the shield were somewhat allayed by the response to the question. At first, he was concerned that All Might would have to tell Izuku the whole story of the quirk One for All and how it started. Perhaps, he reasoned, the shield had a similar history, had been owned by a potential villain. However, that appeared even less likely now. As he gave it more thought, it actually seemed like a kind of odd coincidence that made sense. He still had misgivings about the shield, and they were not going to go away anytime soon. From All Might's perspective, however, it appeared that someone or something else understood Izuku Midoriya's heart and gave him something that would help him on his path to becoming a pro-hero. After transforming into his muscular form, All Might approached the shield to pick it up and give it to Izuku. As he returned it to Izuku, All Might remarked, "However this came to you, young Midoriya, it was meant for you and you alone. Of that I have no doubt. I also have no doubt there are lessons to be learned from it and those lessons will be for you and you alone. Treat it with respect and never forget. Understood?" Izuku accepted the shield back in his hands and exclaimed, "Yes sir." Izuku's genuine fearless smile and thumbs up were given by All Might. At least he could remind the teenager that the shield had a purpose and that he should never treat it disrespectfully, even though he knew it was not his place to take or give it to Izuku. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some personal matters to discuss with my friend. We'll be leaving soon afterwards." Valyria showed Izuku the way to the kitchen and said, "If you want, there's some fresh apples and oranges down in the kitchen. It'll help your stomach to have some soft fresh fruit in it." Valyria shut the doors once more after Izuku left with the shield in tow, then returned her focus to All Might, who had lost his cocky stance. All Might actually turned away in embarrassment when Valyria said, "So, your chosen successor is also quirkless. They say fate isn't without a sense of irony, Toshinori." The woman was shocked by that, which fueled Toshinori's reluctance to respond. "I almost didn't choose him to be my successor. I even told him that he couldn't be a hero without a quirk." In fact, when Toshinori said that, Valyria became irritated with him. "Maybe you better explain from the beginning." In fact, Toshinori flinched at those words and even felt very uneasy in Valyria's presence. The entire history between him and the teenager was explained in a minute or two. Then Valyria shook her head, shocked by what the man in front of her had voluntarily decided to do. "So, had you not seen the boy act like a hero while you couldn't, you would have still let him believe he couldn't be a hero. That about sum it up." Yeah, Toshinori was aware that his actions would always make him feel ashamed. It still weighed heavily on him when he felt it, even though it wasn't undeserving. Before saying something she knew Toshinori needed to hear, Valyria sighed wearily. "Nana Shimura was of a similar mind when she met you. If you hadn't done what you did to convince her that you were worthy to be the next inheritor, well, you certainly wouldn't be All Might to say the least. The irony of it all isn't lost on me. I just couldn't believe I didn't see it since it was literally right in my face." Valyria approached Toshinori and grasped one of his hands. One of the downsides to being a symbol that no one knows about. The expectations grow as does the symbol created by person or people. Both grow until people always expect it even under impossible circumstances and become blind to everything else around them. I've heard that before but in a different way. I don't regret turning myself into a symbol, but what I said to my master was true. I wanted to create a world where everyone can smile, free of worries and fear. And as I told you, it's an admirable goal, but no one can wholly do it on their own." Valyria maintained her composure because she felt that she and Toshinori had previously argued, and that each time it went in a circle that would eventually irritate her to no end. "And yeah, I do remember all the times that you said that you won't have to it forever, but after that fight with Hima, even you have to admit you're running a kind of gamble after waiting so long to find someone to succeed you." After a brief silence, Valyria instructed Toshinori to pose the query she knew he was eager to ask her. "Has there been any signs of All for One?" In terms of Toshinori and the peculiarity that possessed him, the question itself was practically an obsession. However, whenever Toshinori asked her this, her thoughts immediately returned to the altercation in which Toshinori nearly lost his life and how painful it was for her to witness him in such a state. However, that memory was also linked to Sir Night-Eye, Toshinori's sidekick at the time, and how his ability to predict someone's future gave him something he desperately wanted to avoid. As though it had just happened, she could still clearly recall Toshinori and Night-Eye arguing in the hospital hallway about what would happen if Toshinori kept being All Might. Toshinori claimed that he couldn't stop being All Might because doing so would mean ignoring the people who were pleading for assistance from any hero. Sir Night-Eye's predictions of the future were always accurate, so when he said that All Might would battle a villain who would kill him in 6 or 7 years, it was a kind of revelation that was difficult for everyone to accept. Valyria's motivations were more intimate because they concerned Toshinori rather than All Might, but Sir Night-Eye had his own reasons for wanting Toshinori to retire. It's been over 5 years. You defeated him. Even if he lived, you practically crippled him in that fight. Toshinori, controlling his rage at the villain, remarked, "That monster has been around since quirks first appeared. What it took to take him down made me realize that all this time later that he may be down but he doesn't stay down. Not for long." Valyria's voice once again conveyed her current annoyance with Toshinori, which is why you should have chosen a successor all those years ago. Sir Night-Eye was correct that it may have been a rough time had you retired after that fight, but he was also correct that it was the better choice than continuing on with a body as badly damaged as yours. Valyria covered the spot in the middle of the enormous scar that was concealed beneath his shirt with her hand. You were so worried that All for One would return that you ignored your own health and ignoring the smartest choice you could have made all those years ago. Seriously, what's better? A successor with at least 5 years of training in One for All, or a successor that will probably be lucky if he has at least a year? When Valyria reminded him once more of some of his previous decisions, Toshinori turned his head away in embarrassment. She made Toshinori look at her directly by using both of her hands. Both could sense their eyes meeting the others, even without irises. My reasons for retiring from being a pro hero are the same as yours. If I don't take care of myself, then how can I hope to take care of people, or worse, make a mistake that cost lives? Toshinori could see that Valyria was about to cry even without irises, and he was aware of the cause of her tears. Toshinori's hands reached up to gently grasp Valyria's hands, which were still holding his face in place. Which is why I want you to come with me to UA. High to teach. Izuku Midoriya can be taught to be better than I was. But as much as I can teach him, he needs to know more, and aside from the principal and one other member at UA. Hi, no one else knows about One for All. Your own quirk training alone could help him faster understand, to make up for all the time anyone else had who was born with a quirk. Valyria's eyes widened because she had never given that specific thought any thought. With the exception of the hero course at UA, Toshinori had the most experience using One for All. Hai was designed to teach much more than just how to train and refine quirks. She even recalled how different the peculiarities of her classmates were in high school and how no single lesson was able to cover even the most fundamental topics for all of the students. Everyone was required to learn everything they could about both themselves and their classmates. Anthena. Well, maybe we canna. Valyria stepped back a few paces, turned her back on Toshinori, and removed her hands from his face. Toshinori was taken aback by the act, but he chose not to press the issue because Valyria's actions served as a reminder that there was a proper time and place for that specific conversation, and today wasn't that time or place. She remained silent for a while as she considered the opportunity to teach at UA. Elevated. Although it wasn't unusual for someone to accept a teaching position at UA, she was already a teacher at another high school. High was almost unexpected because they were as selective about who they offered teaching jobs to as they were about who they accepted as students. The thought that perhaps this would negate Sir Night-Eye's prophecy of All Might's demise was what ultimately convinced her to make the choice. It might be sufficient to make up for lost time and help Izuku be ready if and when All for One returns if she could assist in training the selected successor. The possibility that her choice would help heal some of the rifts between All Might and Sir Night-Eye was another element that contributed to its positive aspects. Perhaps even Toshinori and her. She turned back to Toshinori and instructed him that there was only one requirement before she would accept the offer of a teaching position. At first, Toshinori was curious about the nature of the condition, but as soon as he saw Valyria smiling, his curiosity turned to dread. A smile he had seen a few times before, and he recalled the trouble it caused to whoever it was aimed at. I'll only accept a teaching position on the condition that all of the birds that were nesting in the surrounding trees flew away in terror when they heard a loud yell outside the house. Are you kidding me?
I will continue this story in next part. Till then, bye bye.